Chapter 1, Someone He Liked. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This is your captain, Lynn Hawthorne. We are on our final approach to Liucheng on flight GX 716. The local temperature is 26 degrees Celsius with partly cloudy skies. On behalf of the crew, I wish you a pleasant journey ahead. With only 10 minutes until landing, Lynn Hawthorne handed over the controls to her first officer. She pulled her phone, still on airplane mode, from her pocket and stared blankly at her chat with Julian Croft. They'd had a small tiff before she boarded, and in a fit of pique, she had deleted his contact. But so far, there was no ad request from him. She was always the one who loved too humbly. Whenever they argued, she was the only one left feeling anxious and unsettled. 3 years ago, she had married Julian Croft, the man she had secretly loved for years. The Hawthorne and Croft families were old friends, and their parents had proposed an arranged marriage. Since she was deeply in love with Julian, she naturally had no objections. But she couldn't understand why Julian, who had always been so independent and strong-willed, would agree to the arrangement. At the time, he had just returned from his fellowship abroad and was a renowned surgeon at Liucheng First Hospital. Handsome and wealthy, he was always surrounded by a flock of beautiful women. Lynn had no idea why he would suddenly agree to marry her. Though they had known each other for years, they had never been close. Besides, rumor had it that he had always been in love with someone else. As West Air's only female captain, Lynn had never lacked for suitors over the years, but none had ever caught her eye. Now, though she had married Julian as she'd always wished, their relationship remained distant. He was hot and cold with her, leaving her in a constant state of insecurity. Especially his eyes, sometimes indifferent, sometimes filled with a deep affection. When he looked at her, it often felt as if he were seeing someone else. It was time for her cabin check. She removed her headset and pushed open the cockpit door, stepping into the aisle. Just as she stepped out, the plane suddenly hit a patch of turbulence and began to shake. A child who had been playing in the aisle lost his balance and stumbled backward. With lightning-fast reflexes, Lynn lunged forward, wrapping her arms around the boy's waist and using her own body as a cushion to break his fall. The child was unharmed, but her elbow struck a seat, leaving a large, painful bruise on her scraped skin. After landing, she had planned to go straight home, but her first officer, Caleb Rivers, insisted she go to the hospital to get her arm looked at. Because her marriage to Julian was not public knowledge, the crew had no idea she was married. She was aware of Caleb's feelings for her and had gently rebuffed him many times, both directly and indirectly, but to little effect. In the end, she couldn't win the argument and went to the emergency room. Just as Caleb helped her sit down in the hallway, she saw a striking figure in a white coat approaching the emergency ward with a nurse. It was Julian Croft, looking as sharp and imposing as ever. Lynn immediately pulled her arm from Caleb's grasp and stood up. Their eyes met. He glanced from Lynn to Caleb, and the warmth in his gaze instantly chilled. The next second, as if he didn't know her at all, he walked straight past her. She stood there, mortified, listening to the light-hearted banter between the patients and nurses in the ward. "Dr. Croft, so young and successful, I wonder if you have a girlfriend?" Of course not. What kind of woman would be good enough for Dr. Croft? Exactly. Should I introduce you to someone, doctor? Julian just smiled without saying a word. It was the nurse beside him who couldn't stand it and spoke up. "Don't you all worry about that. Dr. Croft has had someone he's liked for a long time." Lynn's heart lurched. She didn't understand. Why would the nurse say he had someone he liked, and not that he was already married? Chapter 2. No longer the captain after having her wound bandaged, Lynn declined Caleb Rivers's kind offer to drive her home and took a cab by herself. Flying was exhausting, but she forced herself to stay awake, making a pot of porridge and leaving it on the table for Julian when he got home. Most doctors had stomach problems, and Julian was no exception. Under her care over the years, his gastric pain had finally subsided enough that he could sleep through the night. Whenever the pain flared up, he became particularly vulnerable, holding her tightly in his arms and murmuring her nickname. Lynnie, those were their most intimate moments. Only then could she feel that Julian had some affection for her. When Julian returned, she had just finished her shower. She was in a bathrobe, her hair still dripping. Seeing her slightly disheveled state, he frowned slightly. "Did Caleb Rivers bring you home?" Lynn shook her head and slowly pulled a beautifully wrapped box from her briefcase beside her. In the end, she decided to be the one to break the Cold War. Julian, I was too impulsive before. Please don't be angry. I bought this watch for you. Do you like it? He glanced at it coolly. Do you think it's convenient for a surgeon who has to operate at a moment's notice to wear a watch? Lynn lowered her head, her face burning as if on fire. The box in her hand felt heavy, pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. She clutched the box tightly. That was thoughtless of me. You should go take a shower. To others, she was a resolute and efficient female captain, decisive and capable. But in front of Julian Croft, all that confidence would wither away, leaving her powerless. That night, they lay in the same bed, yet a chasm as wide as a river seemed to separate them. Neither was willing to be the first to cross the line. Finally, Lynn couldn't bear it any longer. She turned on her side and hugged him. Julian? She buried her head in his neck, trying to kiss his chin. Just as the atmosphere grew intimate, he reached out and gently pushed her away. Let's sleep, I'm tired. The night was as cold as water, its chill seeping into her bones and permeating her entire being. She turned her back to him, tears welling up uncontrollably. When she woke up the next day, Julian had already left for the hospital. Lynn freshened up, changed into her uniform, and headed to the airport. Upon her arrival, a group of flight attendants immediately surrounded her. Captain Lynn, don't be sad. That's right, we all know how capable you are. We support you no matter what. She was still confused. It wasn't until she reached the briefing room that she understood. A notice on the bulletin board announced that the captain assignment for flight GX 716 had been changed. She was now the first officer. No wonder the flight attendants had looked at her with such pity and offered words of comfort. She wasn't one to fuss over gains and losses, but she had been flying this route for 2 years. To be suddenly replaced by a captain who had been parachuted in was, at the very least, disappointing. Just as she was about to ask her superiors for an explanation, a stunning figure appeared before her. Seeing Lynn, the woman greeted her proactively. Hello, I'm the new captain, Vivian Vance. I look forward to flying with you. With bright eyes, a dazzling smile, and fair skin, her slightly curled, wavy hair framed a face that radiated a captivating charm, a style completely different from her own. Lynn froze. She couldn't believe it. The woman's face bore a faint, 3/10 resemblance to her own. Except Vivian was more beautiful, more strikingly vibrant. And by a stunning coincidence, her name, Vivi. The sound echoed a name he sometimes used for her, and it sent a chill down her spine. Chapter 3. The first love. It took her a moment to compose herself and return the greeting. Through a brief conversation, she learned that Vivian had been flying international routes for a New York airline and had returned to the country to settle down and, secondly, to win back her first love. New York. Lynn recalled that Julian had also done his fellowship in the United States, though she didn't know in which city. He had always been reluctant to talk about his past with her. For some reason, from the moment she saw Vivian, a heavy stone seemed to press down on her heart, making it hard to breathe. Over the next few days of flying together, Vivian seemed to intentionally try to outshine her, being overly proactive in everything. With her cheerful and outgoing personality, she quickly befriended the flight attendants after giving them all gifts she'd brought back from abroad. The crew members who had previously complained on Lynn's behalf now seemed to be much closer to Vivian. Lynn didn't mind. Professionally, her only goal was to hone her skills, as that was her responsibility to every passenger on board. After another flight, Lynn was pulling her suitcase toward the airport exit when a torrential downpour began. It was already midnight. The airport was in a remote area, making it difficult to get a cab, especially in such heavy rain. Vivian had taken leave for this flight, so Lynn was the lead pilot. By the time she left the airport, her colleagues had already gone home. It was Sunday, so Julian shouldn't have been at the hospital. She wondered if he was asleep yet. After a long hesitation, she finally dialed his number. The call connected after a single ring, but the voice on the other end wasn't Julian's. A cacophony of laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the line. Lynn could hear it clearly. Julian had never liked such gatherings. She had no idea why he was there tonight. It's been so many years, we have to have a few more drinks. Exactly, you two were a perfect match back in the day. Just as she heard this, the call was abruptly disconnected. Lynn stared at her phone screen, having lost the courage to dial a second time. Whether it was the weather or something else, she felt a profound chill throughout her body. She put her phone back in her bag and, in a daze, walked a kilometer in the pouring rain to the main road to hail a cab. By the time she got home, her lips were blue from the cold. Julian hadn't returned. The house was cold and empty. Shivering, she rushed to the bathroom for a hot shower. She felt a little more clear-headed afterward. She made a pot of ginger soup and curled up on the sofa to wait for him. She didn't know how much time had passed when she, drowsy with sleep, was startled by a knock on the door. It was probably Julian. He must have forgotten his keys. She threw off the blanket, jumped off the sofa, and rushed to open the door. As the door swung open, a blast of cold air, thick with the smell of alcohol and a faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers, rushed in. Lynn looked up, her gaze falling on the two people standing a little too close for comfort. She had never expected that the person bringing Julian home would be Vivian Vance. Chapter 4. Just a substitute seeing Lynn, Vivian didn't seem surprised. She just smiled a little shyly. "I'm sorry, Jules drank a bit too much. Everyone else was drinking too, so I had to be the one to bring him home." Jules? She never knew Vivian and Julian knew each other, let alone that they were so close. Before Lynn could respond, Vivian had already helped Julian inside and gently laid him on the sofa. Then she turned to face Lynn. "Lynn, Jules has a weak stomach. He'll definitely have stomach pains later from all the drinking. You should get a hot water bottle for his chest and make some hangover soup for him to drink when he wakes up." Gentle, thoughtful, and considerate, impeccable, really. As if she were the rightful Mrs. Croft. Lynn looked at her, suddenly finding it hard to breathe. "You and Julian seem to have known each other for a long time." Vivian's lips curved into a faint smile. "Yes, has he never mentioned me to you?" Before Lynn could answer, Vivian spoke again, a hint of pride in her voice. "It seems he still can't forget me, which is why he won't even mention my name. You didn't know, did you? When Jules and I were in New York, we had already decided to spend our lives together. But we had a fight right before he came back, and I said we should break up to spite him. I never thought he'd be even more ruthless and just follow his family's arrangement to marry you. I was heartbroken and fell terribly ill. It's only now that I've decided to come back and face everything. Love doesn't follow a first-come, first-served rule, but it does require decency. If he had developed feelings for you, I would have walked away without a second thought. But he got drunk for me tonight, so I know that Jules still has me in his heart. Lynn, I'm sorry. First, I took your captain's position, and now Jules. But I can't control my heart, and neither can he. If you're willing to give him back to me, I can apply to air traffic control to make you the sole female captain of GX 716 again." Vivian's words were an overwhelming flood of information. Lynn fought to keep her composure, glanced at Julian on the sofa, and then asked, "Is this Julian's idea or yours?" Vivian smiled. "My idea is his idea." Lynn's heart turned cold, inch by inch, along with her body. Her breathing was ragged, but she refused to surrender. "If your love is so profound, why are you asking me to give him to you?" Her words made Vivian pause for a moment, then she shook her head with a smile. "I just don't want to hurt you too much. Since it's come to this, I'll be going now. Thanks for your trouble." The door closed. Vivian was gone, but Lynn remained standing by the sofa, lost in a daze. It wasn't until Julian clutched his chest and tugged weakly at her sleeve. "Lynnie." The nickname, usually a source of such intimate joy, now struck Lynn like a bolt of lightning just after Vivian had left. Her heart felt as if it had been viciously stabbed, the pain stealing her breath. "Lynnie, Vivi." Suddenly, she understood why Julian had agreed to marry her all those years ago. A similar face, a similar sounding name. Since he couldn't be with the woman he loved, why not have a substitute like her, someone who loved him, cared for him, a temporary solace for his longing? So, all these years, when Julian's stomach hurt and his mind was clouded, the person he was thinking of and calling for wasn't Lynn Hawthorne, the woman by his side, but Vivian Vance, far away in New York. So, all these years, the person Julian had loved was never her. So, from the very beginning, she had been nothing but a joke. Chapter 5. Divorce. The night was terrifyingly quiet. Julian rolled over and fell back asleep. Lynn gasped for air, one breath at a time. After what felt like an eternity, seeing how much pain he was in from the alcohol, she finally brought a basin of hot water and gently wiped his face with a towel. Then she changed him into his pajamas and covered him with a blanket. He was a neat freak, so even when drunk, he had to be clean. His handsome brows were slightly furrowed, still captivating under the lamplight. But this man, the man she had lived with for so many years, had not a single space for her in his heart. How heartless and how laughable. For 3 years, her devotion had meant nothing. Lost in these thoughts, she fell asleep leaning against the sofa. When she woke, the sky was already bright. The blanket that had been on Julian was now draped over her. Julian himself was already dressed and about to leave. She called out to him, "Julian, I need to talk to you." Julian stopped and turned around. "What is it?" Looking at his cold expression, Lynn suddenly lost the nerve to question him. In front of him, she was always the one who was easily controlled. "Your past with Miss Vance. Why did you never tell me?" Julian frowned slightly, his voice cool. "Because it wasn't necessary." "Not necessary." Lynn smiled bitterly. In his heart, she didn't even deserve the right to know the truth. There was no reason to continue this marriage. She stood up and took a deep breath. "Julian, I did a lot of thinking yesterday. We only got married because of our families. Since we have no feelings for each other, let's just separate. I'll handle things with our parents." Before she could finish, Julian interrupted her, annoyed. "Lynn, what are you making a scene about? If you're trying to get my attention this way, there's no need. I'm very busy. I don't have time for these petty matters." With that, he slammed the door and left. Lynn found it laughable. In his eyes, even a divorce was just a petty matter. What then was a major issue worthy of his time? After that day, Lynn rested at home for 3 days. But Julian never appeared. Perhaps the hospital was truly that busy, so busy he didn't even have a chance to come back. Coincidentally, the time he was so busy perfectly aligned with the time Vivian had returned. She didn't understand. Since she had already tactfully brought up divorce, why didn't Julian just agree to it decisively? The next morning, Lynn had a flight to Haven City and arrived at the airport early. After the routine briefing, a crowd of flight attendants surrounded Vivian, refusing to leave. "Captain Vance, your bracelet is gorgeous." Yes, the sapphire on it must be worth a fortune." Vivian raised her hand, showing the bracelet to everyone. "Isn't it beautiful? I don't really care how much it's worth. The person who gave it to me is what matters most." Everyone smiled knowingly and teased, "The person who gave it to you must be your boyfriend. Captain Vance, we heard you came back for your first love." "Looks like it all worked out?" Vivian blushed. Usually so poised and confident, today she seemed particularly shy. Almost, I'll definitely treat you all to dinner when it's official." The crowd laughed even more happily. "That's great, we'll be waiting for your wedding invitation." "Captain Vance?" Lynn stood at a distance, her gaze following the others to the bracelet on Vivian's fair wrist. If she remembered correctly, that bracelet had been in Julian's drawer 3 years ago. Back then, she had only wanted a glance, but Julian had irritably put it away. Chapter 6. Asserting dominance in all the years she had been married to Julian, he had never once given her a gift. The difference between being loved and not being loved could be so vast. Vivian was the lead pilot for this flight as well. After returning to Liucheng and landing the plane, Vivian blocked Lynn's path. "Lynn, do you know the story behind this bracelet?" She didn't want to talk to Vivian, but hearing it was about the bracelet, she couldn't help but stop. "He gave me this bracelet 3 years ago when he returned to the country. He wanted me to come back with him, but I had just become the only female captain at that New York airline, and I wasn't willing to give up my career for him." Lynn raised her eyes coolly. "So, what are you trying to say?" Vivian picked up a cup of coffee and blew on it gently. "Why do you think I suddenly came back? It was Jules. He used the Croft family's influence to pressure the chairman of West Air to have me replace you as the sole female captain of GX 716. I want you to know that my place in his heart is irreplaceable. If I ask, the captain's seat is mine, and so is the title of Mrs. Croft." Lynn's hands, clenched at her sides, tightened. She bit her lip and retorted stubbornly, "You don't have to declare your victory to me. He's the one refusing the divorce, not me." Hearing her words, Vivian was momentarily stunned, then she laughed out loud. "Do you think he won't divorce you because he has feelings for you? You're wrong. He's doing it for me. I've just returned from abroad. If he divorced you and got together with me immediately, it wouldn't look good for my reputation." Every word was a knife, sharp and bloody, making it impossible for Lynn to breathe. So this was the ugly truth. The air in the room felt as if it had been sucked out, nearly suffocating her. She couldn't stand to be in this space a moment longer. She pushed past Vivian, intending to leave. But in the next second, Vivian, who was holding the coffee, suddenly splashed the entire cup onto her own face. The cockpit door opened, and a group of flight attendants walked in. Seeing the scene before them, they all froze in shock, not daring to step forward. "Captain Vance, what happened to you?" Vivian glanced at Lynn, her eyes instantly filling with tears. "Lynn, I know you've been resentful because I took your captain's position, but it wasn't my intention. I kindly offered you a cup of coffee. Why did you have to throw it on me?" The crowd erupted in an uproar. They couldn't believe that the quiet and gentle-looking Lynn could be so aggressive. Someone had already stepped forward to defend Vivian. "Captain Lynn, that's going too far. Exactly, you can't just bully Captain Vance because she's easygoing." That's right. I think you should apologize to Captain Vance." More and more people gathered at the doorway, blocking the exit completely. Lynn looked at these familiar faces, now filled with disdain and suspicion. 2 years of working together meant less than Vivian's 2 months. Should she say Vivian was brilliant at winning people over, or that she herself hadn't done enough? She felt helpless, and even more so, she found it laughable. She turned, picked up a water bottle from the side, opened the cap, and threw its contents at Vivian. Amidst the screams of the crowd, she put the bottle down and said coldly, "Look closely. This is me splashing you." Then she pushed through the crowd and strode out of the cockpit. Chapter 7. Nurturing the pregnancy. Lynn had always lived by the principle of do not offend others unless they offend you first. But Vivian was pushing her too far. She knew she had no right to compete because Julian didn't love her. She had never even dreamed of fighting Vivian for anything. It was Vivian who had always treated her as an imaginary rival. After the coffee splashing incident at the airport, she was suspended from flying for 2 weeks due to the negative impact it caused. It was just as well. It gave her a few days to rest and recalibrate. That night, as she was sleeping soundly, the room light suddenly switched on. Julian stood before her, radiating fury. She rubbed her eyes, not yet fully awake, but she could already feel his simmering anger. "The burn on Vivian's neck, did you do that?" Lynn froze, sleep instantly vanishing. So, he had rushed back in the middle of the night just to question her. Vivian must have embellished the story at the hospital. Since he had already taken Vivian's side, he certainly wouldn't believe her. If that was the case, what was the point of explaining? With this thought, Lynn looked at him helplessly. What if I did, and what if I didn't? Julian stood by the window. In the shadows, she couldn't see his face, but she could hear the cold, heartless tone of his voice. "You've disappointed me so much. To do this to Vivian out of jealousy. You weren't like this before." She stared at him, a crack forming in her heart as a cold wind howled through. Even though she was deeply wronged, she refused to explain. She raised her head defiantly. "So, are you here to seek justice for her?" Julian's brow furrowed into a deep line. "You should apologize to her." Lynn laughed, a mix of anger and despair. "Julian Croft, if you care about her that much, then sign the damn divorce papers. From now on, we go our separate ways and stay out of each other's lives." Her words angered him further. His brow tightened, his face as dark as a sky about to unleash a storm. "You're in such a hurry to divorce, rushing to throw yourself into Caleb Rivers's arms?" It felt like a heavy blow. It took Lynn a moment to recover. It was Julian who was at fault in this marriage, yet here he was, standing on a moral high ground, accusing her. She turned her head away, no longer looking at him. "Think whatever you want," he stated coldly. "I will never agree to a divorce." In the end, they parted on bad terms once again. It was half a month later when she resumed flying. Due to the last incident, her route and flight schedule had been changed. In the locker room, she had just changed into her uniform when she bumped into Vivian, who was walking in. She had no intention of making small talk and was about to sidestep her and leave. "Lynn, congratulations, you're finally West Air's only female captain again." Lynn stopped and turned back, confused. "What do you mean?" Vivian smiled, her bright red lips looking particularly piercing under the lights. "I've resigned." Lynn was stunned for a moment, then turned to continue on her way. From behind her, Vivian's voice, full of pride, followed. I'm pregnant. Jules said flying isn't suitable for my condition, so I'm planning to stay home and take care of myself. Chapter 8. Blocked Lynn didn't know how she managed to walk out of the locker room. Perhaps fleeing in disarray was a more apt description. In less than 3 months, Vivian was pregnant with Julian's child. Then what did that make her, Mrs. Croft? This time, she was truly ready to give up. Whether Julian agreed or not, she was going to divorce him. She once naively believed that a marriage could work as long as she alone loved Julian with sincerity and passion. But reality had shown her how ridiculous that idea was. In Julian Croft's heart, there was no space for her at all. For so many years, she had strived to occupy a small corner of his heart. Little did she know, she was just Vivian's substitute. All her kindness to him was merely paving the way for their reunion. She squatted on the floor and cried for a long time before wiping away her tears and heading back to the cockpit. No matter how difficult life was, she had to be fully focused at work. She was responsible for the lives of over 100 people on the plane. But this flight was not as smooth as usual. Not long after landing in Haben City, a magnitude 5 earthquake struck, triggering a tsunami that devastated the entire city. Lynn led the crew to the nearest hotel. After getting everyone settled, she called her parents to let them know she was safe. The news was filled with reports about the earthquake in Haben City. Julian must have known by now. She looked at the empty chat window on her phone and let out a self-deprecating laugh. Even at a time like this, she was still foolishly hoping he would care about her. He was probably with Vivian right now, happily planning their future with their child. Lynn tapped on his profile picture, hesitated for a long time, and finally hit the block button. In Liucheng, Julian had just finished a 6-hour surgery. Recently, the senior professors at the hospital had all been sent to Beijing for training, leaving all the heavy lifting to him. A series of back-to-back surgeries left him with no time or energy to deal with matters at home. Lately, Lynn hadn't been herself. Though their relationship was far from sweet, they had always treated each other with respect. He didn't know why she had suddenly brought up divorce, and she had brought it up twice. He planned to have a serious talk with her once he cleared his workload. After changing his clothes, he walked to his office and saw a group of nurses clustered at the door, whispering about something. When they saw him, they immediately gathered around. "Dr. Croft, did you hear? There was an earthquake in Haben City. It caused a tsunami, and now the city is in chaos." Haben City? Countless images flashed through Julian's mind. He vaguely remembered that Lynn's route had been changed after her suspension. And the new route? He was almost certain it was Haben City. He quickly pulled out his phone and dialed Lynn's number, but the call wouldn't go through. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He opened his messaging app and sent her a text. "Are you okay?" The message was met with a red exclamation mark. She had actually blocked him. A terrible premonition bloomed in Julian's heart. She was always calm and mature. She wouldn't joke about divorce. Could it be that this time, she was serious? As his thoughts spiraled, he heard the urgent voice of Director Finch. "The earthquake in Haben City has triggered a tsunami. The hospitals there are overwhelmed, and they're in desperate need of medical personnel. Our hospital is organizing a relief team to go and help. Who wants to volunteer?" Julian glanced at the unanswered call on his phone and replied without a second thought. "I'll go." Chapter 9. "I'll do it at first." Director Finch disagreed with Julian's proposal, but he couldn't overcome his insistence and finally had to consent. Led by Julian, Liucheng First Hospital dispatched a medical team of 10 doctors and 20 nurses to Haben City. Upon arriving, he immediately threw himself into the tense rescue efforts, all the while searching for any sign of Lynn. It wasn't until 3 days later, on the way to the hospital with a group of injured people, that he finally saw her. Days of continuous rain had left the roads soaked. Lynn, without an umbrella, was standing in the middle of the road, carefully carrying a child as she ran toward a tent. After putting the child down, she turned and walked back into the rain. He had 1,000 things to say, but now was not the time. For now, seeing that she was safe was enough to put his mind at ease. The hospital was overflowing with patients. More and more injured people were arriving, and there was no space left to accommodate new ones. Julian surveyed the scene, his expression grave, and spoke to the director. "Given the situation, we need to arrange for a helicopter to transport the most critical patients to other cities." The director looked at him, troubled. The supply helicopter is on the hospital roof, but the pilot injured his hand while moving supplies. We don't have time to wait for a new pilot to arrive. No matter how skilled they were as doctors, they were helpless without the necessary equipment. Just as everyone was at their wits' end, a clear and powerful voice cut through the crowd. I'm the captain of Flight GX716, and I'm also certified to fly helicopters. Let me fly them to safety. Julian followed the crowd's gaze, and his eyes met Lynn's clean, clear, and determined. His heart pounded in his chest. He strode forward, wanting to grab her hand. But Lynn wouldn't give him a second glance. Dr. Croft, taking care of the patients is the priority. Yes, there were more important things right now. They could talk later at home. Julian turned and instructed the nurses to move the injured onto the helicopter. To save space, only he and one other nurse would accompany them. Beneath the dark clouds, Haven City was a blanket of gray. But above the cloud layer, the sun was bright. If she were flying a commercial airliner, she would be able to see the magnificent rays of light on the horizon. But the helicopter she was flying now couldn't go too high. It had to skim the cloud tops, and the view was shrouded in mist. The mood inside the cabin was heavy. She put on her headset and spoke to everyone, trying to lift their spirits. It is my honor to fly you all. Please rest assured, I will get you home safely. After Lynn's words, the atmosphere in the cabin lightened somewhat. Throughout the journey, Julian's gaze fell on her several times, but she ignored him completely. Since I've decided to leave him, it's better not to get entangled again, she thought. Indecisiveness will only lead to more trouble. This time, I won't hesitate. As the helicopter flew over a jungle, the weather suddenly turned violent. Gusts of wind battered the aircraft, sending it spinning in place. The patients in the cabin screamed in terror. Only Julian remained calm, comforting everyone one by one. Don't worry, Captain Hawthorne is a very experienced pilot. We'll be fine. Lynn looked at the man behind her, his eyes as bright as stars, and a wave of warmth washed over her. At a time like this, he was the only one who would trust her unconditionally. But this time, even she wasn't confident. The rotor was damaged, the controls were failing. The helicopter could no longer fly. They had to request backup and then parachute to safety while they waited. There were 8 patients, 1 nurse plus her and Julian. That made 11 people. But on the helicopter, there were only 10 parachutes. Chapter 10. The crash, the jungle below, was dotted with villages. If the helicopter crashed here, the resulting explosion would not only endanger the parachuting patients, but also bring catastrophic destruction to the residents below. She had to get everyone off the helicopter with their parachutes as quickly as possible. Then, she would fly the aircraft out over the sea, far away from the villages. If she had a parachute, she might have a chance. But without that final safety net, her fate was left to chance. She glanced at the control panel. The emergency light was flashing red. Time was running out. She immediately took off her headset, made her decision, and turned to Julian. The helicopter can't fly anymore. Dr. Croft, get everyone fitted with parachutes. Prepare to jump and wait for rescue. Julian looked back at her. Without asking any questions, he immediately turned and, with the nurse, began helping the patients put on their parachute packs. After everyone was geared up, only Lynn remained still. Watching the patients and the nurse jump from the aircraft one by one, with only Julian left in the cabin, Lynn said urgently, "You jump first, I'll follow after I fly the helicopter away from the drop zone." For the first time, Julian's calm facade crumbled because of her. He didn't speak. Instead, he began taking off his own parachute, his breath catching. "There are only 10 parachute packs on this helicopter. You never planned on jumping, did you?" She hadn't expected him to notice, but what did it matter now that he knew the truth? She had never thought that the first time she would feel his concern would be in a life or death situation like this. She suppressed the emotions surging in her heart, and without even looking back at him said, "No, there's a backup parachute for the captain in the cockpit. I'll follow after I fly the helicopter away from the village. You jump first, don't waste any more time." Julian's eyes darkened, but they still held a starlit glint. He stubbornly refused to put his parachute back on. "No, if we jump together. I will never let you sacrifice yourself alone." A flash of shock crossed Lynn's eyes. He didn't love her, so why did he care so much about her life right now? The helicopter's rotors were slowing down. If they delayed any longer, neither of them would make it out alive, and they would endanger those who had already successfully jumped. Lynn hesitated no more. She quickly engaged the autopilot and strode over to him, wrapping him in a hug. "You're overthinking it. I wouldn't joke with my own life." As she spoke, she moved in front of him, her hands swiftly working behind his back to fasten the parachute. Her eyes reddened, but her tone was firm. "By the way, I forgot to tell you, I've already signed the divorce papers. You can sign them when you get home. Vivian and your child are waiting for you. Julian, I can't take care of you anymore. I wish you happiness." As her words fell, she pulled the ring from her finger and slipped it into his pocket. Before she could see the look of astonishment on his face, she pushed him forcefully out of the cabin door. "Lynn," the rest of his voice was swallowed by the wind. She didn't look down again. She rushed back to the pilot's seat. The helicopter began to descend rapidly. She fought with all her strength to pull the aircraft up again. The roar of the engine was deafening, the cabin shook violently, but Lynn held onto the control stick, refusing to let go. She had to fly the helicopter further away. A little further, and the people below would be a little safer. Meanwhile, the control tower's voice crackled through the radio. "ZH-5167, you have exceeded your altitude limit. Return to base immediately. ZH-5167, you have exceeded your altitude limit. Return to base immediately. ZH-5167, you have exceeded your altitude limit. Return to base immediately." She ignored the calls until the helicopter finally reached the sea. Her hands, from gripping the controls too tightly, were an unnatural shade of red. Only then, facing the sea breeze, did she speak with the resolve of someone facing death. "ZH-5167 to control, I am unable to return." As she spoke her last words, the helicopter lost all control and plummeted toward the sea. A moment later, a massive explosion echoed across the sky, blooming like a red cloud over the ocean's surface. Chapter 11. As Lynn fastened the parachute to him and pushed him out of the helicopter, an inexplicable panic seized Julian. He desperately tried to grab her hand, but couldn't. Julian spread his arms, watching the cabin door slowly close, watching Lynn disappear from his sight. What did she just say? Wish him, Vivian, and their child happiness? What child? The parachute carried Julian slowly downward. But before he could even process her words, he saw the helicopter Lynn was piloting begin a steep dive toward the sea. Julian's heart leaped into his throat. "Lynnie," he screamed, trying to maneuver his parachute toward the crash site. But before he had moved more than a few meters, the helicopter exploded. A deafening roar filled the sky, and an orange-red cloud blossomed over the sea. Julian was stunned. He stared intently at the point of the explosion, hoping to see the figure he so desperately longed for. Lynn was West Air's best pilot. She had escaped death and turned impossible situations around many times before. She had to be alive. Julian scanned the area frantically, but all he could see were a few charred pieces of helicopter debris floating on the water. Nothing else. Julian's heart sank. After what felt like an eternity in the air, Julian finally landed on the ground. The moment his feet touched the earth, he tore off the parachute and scrambled toward the sea where Lynn's helicopter had crashed. It can't be. Lynn can't be hurt. Julian felt the blood rush to his head. He didn't know how long he had been running, but he still couldn't see the shoreline. He had landed on a mountainside, a considerable distance from the sea. The mountain was undeveloped, with no path to speak of. But Julian charged down the slope as if his life depended on it, ignoring the tangled undergrowth and thorny bushes. He had to confirm Lynn's safety. Immediately, he was a doctor. He had to save her. He had to save his beloved wife. His arms and other parts of his body were scratched by branches and thorns. But Julian seemed to feel no pain, continuing to run without stopping. Finally, he reached the bottom of the mountain. In the distance, he saw a plume of thick black smoke rising from the vast blue sea. A flicker of hope ignited in Julian's heart. He was almost there. He was so close. But he tripped on a rock and fell heavily onto the sandy ground. A sharp pain shot through him, but Julian had no time to care. He struggled to get up but found that his strength was gone. He couldn't stand. His battered fist slammed into the sand. Tears streamed down Julian's face. How could he fall now? He still had to save Lynn. He used his hands and feet, crawling, trying to move toward the sea. But before he had crawled even half a meter, he could no longer hold on and passed out. When he woke up, it was 2 days later. Julian's eyes shot open. "Lynnie," he cried out. He tried to sit up but felt the drip of an IV in his hand. From his side, a sweet female voice spoke. "Jules, I'm here." Chapter 12, Julian's face lit up with joy as he looked to his right, only to find it wasn't the person he was hoping for. Sitting by his bedside was Vivian Vance, not Lynn Hawthorne, not his Lynnie. Julian's expression immediately turned cold. "Vivian, you know you're not the one I'm looking for." The IV bag was not yet empty. Julian knew he couldn't go anywhere, so he fell back onto the bed. He remembered being close to the shore before he passed out. Now that he was in a hospital, he must have been rescued by a search team. If he was rescued, did that mean Lynn was rescued too? Julian looked at Vivian, his voice urgent. "Where's Lynnie? How is she?" Vivian knew exactly who Julian meant by Lynnie. But she avoided the question, picking up a thermal flask from the table. "Jules, you've been unconscious for 2 days and nights without eating. I made some porridge. You should have some. No matter what, you need to take care of yourself first." But Julian was not moved by her kindness. His voice was filled with ice. "Vivian, tell me, how is Lynn now?" Vivian fell silent for a moment. She put the flask back on the table and said, "Jules, you need to prepare yourself. Lynn. She has been missing for over 48 hours. It's very likely she didn't make it." As a pilot herself, Vivian understood what it meant to be missing for more than 48 hours after a helicopter crash. Although she and Lynn were rivals in love, from a professional standpoint, Lynn was a colleague she respected and admired. Hearing Vivian's words, Julian's eyes immediately reddened. "Number impossible. You're lying to me, right? I don't believe you." As he spoke, he tried to rip the IV needle from the back of his hand to go find her, but Vivian held him down. "Jules, don't be rash." Julian was extremely weak. He hadn't eaten in 2 days and nights, and his body was covered in cuts and scrapes. In his struggle, he found he couldn't even overpower Vivian. Seeing Julian in this state, Vivian tried to soothe him. "Jules, don't panic. The Maritime Search and Rescue Team is working around the clock. Even though they haven't found her yet, maybe she was rescued by a villager." As a fellow pilot, Vivian knew that the chances of surviving such a crash were slim to none. But seeing Julian so distraught, she feared that if she told him Lynn was most likely dead, he might try to follow her. Julian hung his head, his heart filled with bitterness. He had seen Lynn's determination to die on the helicopter. He had wanted to stay with her. After all, they were husband and wife. They should face life and death together. But he never expected that Lynn, while hugging him, would secretly fasten the parachute to his back. Julian had been surprised by Lynn's sudden closeness, but by the time he realized what was happening, she had already pushed him out of the helicopter. Just before boarding the helicopter, Julian had been thinking that after this rescue mission, he would go home and have a serious talk with Lynn about the divorce. He would not agree to it. He thought they could talk about everything when they got home, but he never imagined it would be their final farewell. Julian closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his cheek. Chapter 13, he wasn't a fool. 48 hours had passed. Lynn was very likely gone. He had witnessed the explosion with his own eyes. The massive helicopter had been reduced to fragments. How could Lynn's slender body have withstood such a blast? Julian thought he would have plenty of time to explain the past few years to Lynn, but he never imagined that the future he had envisioned would never come. Seeing the tear on Julian's cheek, Vivian was stunned. In all the years she had known him, she had never seen him cry. Julian, who remained unfazed by the goriest of surgeries and the most pitiful of patients, was actually shedding tears for Lynn. He loved her that much. Julian opened his eyes and noticed something sparkling on the bedside table. It was the diamond ring he had given Lynn when they got married 3 years ago. How did his and Lynn's wedding ring get here? Julian picked it up. It was indeed the one he had given her. Lynn had never taken this ring off. It must have been slipped into his pocket by Lynn when she hugged him on the helicopter. She had even returned the wedding ring. It seemed her previous talk of divorce had been serious. In fact, this wedding ring was a custom design by a world-renowned jewelry designer, the only one of its kind. But when they got married, he had arrogantly told Lynn that he had his assistant buy it randomly from a department store. Julian didn't know that Lynn had actually believed his story. Despite knowing his dismissive attitude toward the ring, Lynn had cherished it. It was, after all, the first and only gift Julian had ever given her. Julian didn't know why Lynn had suddenly brought up divorce and even mentioned it twice. He had a gut feeling there was a misunderstanding, but before he could uncover the root of the problem, they were separated by death. Julian caressed their wedding ring, suddenly remembering Lynn's last words to him before she pushed him from the plane. She said Vivian and their child were waiting for him. What child? He and Vivian didn't have a child. Julian's eyes were still moist. He turned to Vivian and asked, "Why did Lynnie say that you and I have a child? What nonsense did you tell her?" Remembering this, Vivian felt a pang of guilt. "Jules, didn't you ask me to help you and Lynnie's relationship along? I saw that nothing had changed after so long, so I lied and told her I resigned because I was pregnant with your child." Julian frowned. "Vivian, that was a foolish thing to do. No wonder Lynnie wanted to divorce me." Vivian knew she had messed up and stuck out her tongue. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought that when Lynnie found out, she would definitely confront you, and then you two could finally talk things out. Who knew she would just believe my words without even asking and then want a divorce? Jules, it's not my place to say, but I've never seen two people as stubborn as you and Lynn. You're clearly deeply in love with each other, but you both have to pretend you don't care at all. Why make yourselves suffer like this?" Julian closed his eyes in pain. Did she really love me? How could she not love you? It's obvious she's been in love with you for years. Hearing Vivian's words, Julian froze. Chapter 14, the Croft and Hawthorne families were old friends. In fact, Julian had been smitten with the little girl from the Hawthorne family since he was very young. But Julian had always been proud. Though he liked Lynn, he wouldn't allow himself to reveal his feelings until she liked him back. So even Julian's closest friends only knew that he had someone he liked, but not who she was. Julian and Lynn had known each other for years, often visiting each other's homes with their parents since childhood. But in all those years, they hadn't even exchanged contact information. Both Lynn and Julian were emotionally reserved and introverted, which was likely why they chose careers as a pilot and a doctor, professions that required emotional stability. But it was precisely because they rarely expressed their emotions that they had no idea the other had been secretly in love with them for years. It was a tragic misunderstanding. During his years of fellowship abroad, Julian met Vivian. Vivian bore a 3/10 resemblance to Lynn, but she was bright-eyed and fair-skinned, with slightly curled, wavy hair that gave her a captivating charm, a style completely different from Lynn's. Vivian was immediately drawn to a man of Julian's caliber. Within half a month, she began her pursuit of him. Julian didn't like Vivian, but every time he looked at her face, so similar to Lynn's, he couldn't help but look a little longer. He hadn't seen Lynn in a long time during his years abroad. Julian rejected Vivian's confession, but also honestly told her that she resembled the person he liked. Moreover, like Lynn, Vivian was also a rare female pilot. What a coincidence. Having lived abroad for a long time, Vivian was very open about matters of the heart. So when she heard Julian's frank admission, she laughed instead of getting angry. "If you say so, it means the person you like doesn't like you back, right? Since I look like her and I like you, you can think of me as her and try to like me too. I don't mind being her substitute." Julian didn't agree to Vivian's proposal, but he was struck by her directness. From then on, they broke the ice and became friends. What Julian didn't expect was that just after returning home from his 2-year fellowship, his parents told him they were discussing an arranged marriage with the Hawthorne family and asked for his opinion. Happiness came so suddenly that Julian was almost overwhelmed. An arranged marriage with the Hawthorne family, the same Hawthorne family I used to visit. His mother, Lynnie, found his reaction strange. "Yes, the Hawthorne family we used to take you to visit when you were little. Your father and I want you to marry Lynn, Richard's daughter." Marry Lynn? Julian didn't even have his crush's contact information, and now their marriage was being finalized. Seeing Julian remain silent, his mother pressed on. "Julian, does your reaction mean you agree or disagree? If you're not willing, we won't force you. This marriage isn't a must. Your father and I put your happiness first." Julian had been in love with Lynn for years. How could he refuse such a perfect opportunity? So he said, "Mom, I naturally have no objections, but will Miss Hawthorne be willing?" Seeing that Julian didn't object, Lynnie was clearly surprised. Normally, Julian would never accept something he didn't like. Hearing Julian's question, she replied, "Lynn has no objections. She said she'll listen to her parents regarding her marriage. She's willing to marry you. Hearing his mother's reply, Julian's initial excitement faded. What did she mean? Listen to her parents? So even if the man she was marrying wasn't him, Lynn would still follow her parents' arrangement and marry him. Julian was displeased. It seemed that in Lynn's eyes, he was no different from anyone else. But he didn't realize that Lynn, like him, was incredibly stubborn. Chapter 15. Both the Croft and Hawthorne families were prominent in Liucheng, so their marriage alliance was, naturally, a grand affair. The wedding was magnificent. Julian, in a tailored black suit and holding a bouquet, stood under the spotlight, waiting for his bride. No one noticed that Julian, who usually remained composed even in the face of chaos, was now breathing unevenly. Julian stared fixedly at the end of the red carpet. As the wedding march began, Lynn, in a pristine white gown, walked slowly toward him, holding her father's arm. The strapless wedding dress made Lynn look breathtakingly beautiful. Julian almost thought he was dreaming. He was actually marrying the girl he loved. He didn't know if it was his imagination, but when Julian took Lynn's hand, he distinctly met her gaze, which was filled with love. Julian's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Lynn loved him too? But when he looked again, her expression was back to normal. It must have been his mistake. After getting married, their life wasn't exactly sweet, but they treated each other with respect. Both had demanding jobs, so they had little time to cultivate their relationship. And Julian was too proud to express his love, because he felt that Lynn didn't love him and had married him purely out of obedience to her parents. Julian was angry about this, feeling that to Lynn, he was no different from anyone else. But he also felt that, aside from not loving him, Lynn did everything else perfectly. She would make him a late-night snack when he came home late, and she would be a filial daughter-in-law, chatting with his parents when they visited. In short, she gave him no reason to find fault. But that wasn't what Julian wanted. He wanted her affection, her love, but every time he looked into her eyes, all he saw was calmness. She was never jealous of him with other women, never threw a tantrum, and never said any sweet nothings to express her love. Even during their rare moments of intimacy, Julian felt she was just going through the motions, as if she were treating him like a task to be completed. Feeling no love from Lynn, Julian naturally wasn't very warm to her either. His heart sank especially when he once saw Caleb Rivers making advances toward Lynn. Julian knew Caleb was Lynn's first officer. They worked together every day. Had feelings developed between them over time? Julian was too proud to confront Lynn, but his heart was heavy, so he could only say things he didn't mean. Julian was not good at expressing love, and neither was Lynn. They were both extremely proud people, willing to break rather than bend. Although they were deeply in love with each other, they didn't understand that sometimes love requires softening and yielding. Because it's not about being inferior or surrendering, it's proof of love. Both Julian and Lynn thought they were trapped in the pain of unrequited love. But Julian overlooked the forbearance and tears behind Lynn's nonchalant facade, and Lynn overlooked the concern hidden in his furrowed brows. So when Julian heard Vivian say that Lynn had loved him for many years, he was filled with disbelief. Seeing Julian's expression, Vivian couldn't help but gape. "Julian, don't tell me you didn't know Lynn liked you." Julian didn't answer, but Vivian could read the affirmative answer in his expression. Vivian shook her head in frustration. "Jules, you're a fool. Lynn loves you very much. I forgot to tell you, the day you were drunk and I brought you home, I found Lynn waiting for you on the sofa. When she opened the door for me, it seemed like she had just been startled awake from the sofa. And as soon as I walked in, I smelled ginger soup. She must have made it especially for you. And that day, I deliberately said you were my ex-boyfriend and that you married her because you were using her as a substitute after we broke up." I could tell she was very hurt after hearing that. Jules, her feelings for you are definitely no less than yours for her. Chapter 16, hearing Vivian's words, Julian couldn't help but frown. He had never known about these things. "Vivian, how could you say such things to Lynnie?" If Lynn loved him as much as Vivian said, how hurt must she have been to hear those words? Vivian looked helpless. "I was just trying to use reverse psychology on Lynn. Who knew it would be like punching cots? She didn't even confront you." Now that he understood the whole story, Julian felt it was utterly absurd. So he and Lynn had been in love with each other all along, but neither had broken the silence. They both lived in their own worlds, each believing they were the ones suffering from unrequited love. How could something so ridiculous happen? But now that Julian had finally learned the truth, Lynn was missing. Julian glanced at the IV drip. It was almost empty. He braced himself and took the porridge from Vivian. He ate a few mouthfuls, just enough to fill his stomach. The moment the IV was finished, he pulled the needle from the back of his hand, put on his shoes, and was about to join the maritime search and rescue team. He didn't want to wait another second. But before he reached the door, someone rushed in, nearly colliding with him. The person was the director of Liucheng First Hospital, Dr. Alastair Finch. He grabbed Julian's arm and said, "Julian, the lab results for the helicopter wreckage sent to the analysis department are back. The results show a significant amount of Captain Hawthorne's biological tissue on the wreckage. They've concluded that she died in the helicopter explosion. But fortunately, the other 10 passengers, including you, are not in life-threatening danger. It's a silver lining in this tragedy." Julian couldn't hear what the director said after that. His mind only echoed with the phrase, "Captain Hawthorne died in the helicopter explosion." Lynn was really dead. After a moment of stunned silence, Julian's emotions erupted. He pushed past the director and rushed out of the room. No, impossible, they must not have looked carefully enough. "I'm going to find her myself." The director and Vivian flanked him, stopping the rampaging Julian. Vivian's heart ached for Lynn, but she didn't want to see Julian do something foolish. Jules, the maritime search and rescue team, has been searching for 2 whole days. They really didn't find Lynn. "Jules, you and I both know that in a helicopter crash like this, the pilot couldn't possibly have survived. I think Lynn, like me, knew this day might come when we chose to become pilots. For us, it's the highest honor. At least she protected all the passengers on the helicopter, didn't she?" Julian broke free from Vivian's grasp and roared, "I don't want her to be a hero, I just want her to be alive." Hearing Julian's words, the director and Vivian fell silent. Seeing that Julian was no longer trying to run out, they released him. The director was one of the few people at the hospital who knew Julian and Lynn were married. He had been invited to their wedding. Hearing the news of Lynn's death was hard for him to take. Such a wonderful couple, how did they end up separated by death? Julian's face was streaked with tears. He clenched his fists, his voice a choked whisper. I just want her to be by my side." Julian fell to his knees, sobbing. His desperate cries echoed through the entire floor. He was filled with regret. He had just understood Lynn's feelings for him, and now they were forever parted. He had so much more he wanted to say to her. He wanted to say he was sorry. Sorry for being so hot and cold with her during their marriage. He wanted to say thank you. Thank you for everything she had done for him over the years. But most of all, he wanted to say, "I love you." He wanted to say, "Lynnie, you never knew, but I've been in love with you for many, many years." Chapter 17. After learning of Lynn's death, Julian became a different person. He spent his days lying in his hospital bed, not sleeping, not talking, just silently staring out the window. As if sensing his mood, the heavens cooperated, sending rain for several days in a row. The patter of rain against the window, trickling down the glass, added to the sorrowful atmosphere. Depression slows down the healing of wounds. The cuts and scrapes from the branches and thorns all over Julian's body should have healed and scabbed over within 10 days. But now, after more than half a month, they were only just beginning to show signs of healing. Vivian brought him meals every day, forcing him to eat something. Otherwise, if left alone, Julian might not eat at all. Seeing Julian in this listless state, Vivian was very worried. More than half a month had passed, and the search and rescue efforts in Haben City were coming to an end. But because the earthquake had come so suddenly, and the resulting tsunami had flooded the villages, the number of casualties was high. The medical team from Liucheng First Hospital was still in Haben City, providing relief and aid. During these days, apart from visiting Julian, Vivian spent the rest of her time helping the Liucheng First Hospital rescue team transport supplies and the injured. It's only when faced with natural disasters that one realizes how small they are. In the face of nature's wrath, humanity is insignificant, but Vivian still wanted to do what she could to help. Julian was the best surgeon at Liucheng First Hospital. If he weren't lying here now, he could have saved many patients. As the saying goes, it's hard for a doctor to heal himself. Julian's current condition was mostly a matter of the heart. His physical injuries were not a major issue for him. In fact, Vivian had come today at the director's request, hoping he would recover quickly and help with the chaotic medical situation in Haven City. Although Julian hadn't inherited the family business, he had been raised as the heir, so his leadership and organizational skills were excellent. Perhaps because he was so outstanding and calm, and possessed an aura of unquestionable authority, his suggestions were rarely challenged, which greatly reduced the difficulty of their work. If Julian were present, their treatment efforts would surely be easier and more efficient. The director knew that Julian was grieving the loss of his beloved wife and would need time to recover. But more than half a month had passed. It was time for Julian to shoulder his responsibilities as a doctor. Vivian placed the meal she had brought on Julian's small table and said softly, "Jules, it's time to eat. Have a little something. You've lost so much weight recently." The dishes Vivian brought were all of Julian's usual favorites, but now he was in no mood for them. Julian continued to look out the window, but this time he spoke. "Vivian, thank you for taking care of me these past few days. But starting tomorrow, could you please not come? I can't bear to see you." Vivian was taken aback, but she quickly understood what he meant. Because she looked so much like Lynn, every time Julian saw her, he couldn't help but be reminded of Lynn's face and smile. But Lynn was never coming back. Without her, the world seemed to have turned gray. Chapter 18, for the past half a month, Julian hadn't been eating well, and his stomach often ached. During his 3 years of marriage to Lynn, her care had finally brought his gastric pain under control, allowing him to sleep through the night. But occasionally, the pain would still flare up. At those times, Julian was particularly vulnerable. He would use it as an excuse to hold Lynn tightly, murmuring her nickname like a child seeking comfort, Lynnie. He used to think Lynn didn't push him away because she felt sorry for him when he was in pain. So, amidst the pain, he would secretly delight in those rare moments of intimacy. But only now did Julian understand. Lynn didn't push him away not because she couldn't, but because she never wanted to. They had been deeply in love for so many years, yet they had kept each other in the dark. But now, when his stomach ached, there was no Lynn to be his human pillow, no Lynn to gently rub his stomach with her small hands and comfort him softly. The thought of this filled Julian with despair. Why didn't he cherish her when she was here? Why did he have to be so stubborn, so proud, refusing to take the first step to express his love? If he had, they wouldn't have missed out on all these years. But now, she was gone, and all the regret in the world was useless. Seeing Julian's despair, Vivian felt a sharp pain in her heart. The Julian of the past was so full of life, the center of attention wherever he went. But now, he showed signs of decay and defeat. Worried, Vivian couldn't help but pour out her thoughts. "Jules, I know Lynnie's death has been a huge blow to you. We are all heartbroken. But the dead are gone. She's not coming back. What's the point of torturing yourself like this? Jules, Lynnie's death had nothing to do with you. It was a flying accident caused by severe weather. You don't have to blame yourself. You don't have to live in guilt. I don't think she would want to see you in this dejected state. She gave you the last parachute because she wanted you to live, to accomplish the things she couldn't. Jules, I know your will to live is weak, that you might even want to follow Lynnie. But you can't be so irresponsible. You still have your parents to take care of, and Lynnie's parents need you to comfort them too. You lost a wife, but they lost a daughter. Their pain is no less than yours. Lynnie was such a kind person. When she knew people needed help, she stepped forward without hesitation. Jules, I think helping others was your original intention for becoming a doctor. You've saved so many lives, taught so many people to cherish life and their bodies. How come when it happens to you, you can't see reason? Jules, pull yourself together, please." Julian remained silent, but Vivian's words were like a splash of cold water, waking him up. Yes, if Lynn were still alive, she would want to see him helping patients, doing good deeds, not this fragile version of himself, unable to eat, sick in bed. Lynn was always the kindest person. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stepped up when there was no pilot. If Lynn were still here, she would be personally helping the disaster victims. Julian felt a daze come over him. He shouldn't continue this decline. He should, in her name, fulfill the dreams and carry on the legacy that Lynn left behind. Chapter 19, perhaps Vivian's words had awakened something in Julian. Although he didn't say anything, his mental state was clearly different. He ate the 3 meals a day the hospital provided. He even proactively went for a gastroscopy and requested treatment for his stomach condition. Within a week, Julian was discharged from the hospital. Upon his discharge, Julian immediately returned to the medical station where the Liucheng First Hospital team was based and began helping the remaining patients. More than half a month had passed since the earthquake and tsunami. Most of the retrievable victims had been rescued. The conditions in the disaster area were harsh. Julian was now working with his colleagues from Liucheng First Hospital in a temporary clinic set up by the government. He seemed to have reverted to the stern, unsmiling Dr. Croft of old. When he finally got a moment to breathe, Julian stepped out of the makeshift clinic and saw the scene outside. This was the first time Julian had truly faced the aftermath of an earthquake. The weather was beautiful today, the sky a deep blue. But the scene below was a stark contrast to this beauty. Everywhere he looked, there were ruins and rubble and people who had lost their homes. Julian held his breath, suddenly feeling a profound sense of helplessness. Liucheng was an inland city. Julian had never experienced an earthquake. Moreover, the Croft family was prominent. Julian had lived a life of luxury since childhood, never knowing hardship. He had only seen the peaceful side of life, unaware of the burdens so many others carried. But despite his high station, Julian had a heart for the world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up inheriting the family business to insist on studying medicine to heal the sick. And Lynn was clearly the same kind of person. Perhaps that was why they had fallen in love with each other. They had sensed a kindred spirit. Julian took a deep breath and made a phone call. A respectful voice answered on the other end. "Young Mr. Croft, what are your instructions? Take $5 million from my account and donate it to Haven City. Send someone to oversee it. Make sure every single cent is spent on post-disaster reconstruction and aid for the victims. If you find anyone trying to embezzle the funds, you know what to do." The person on the other end replied with a "Yes, sir," and the call ended quickly. Julian sighed. A disaster of this scale was something no one wanted to see. This was one of the few things he could do to help. Soon, more patients were brought in, and Julian plunged back into his work. He was busy until nightfall. Julian stretched his stiff muscles, only then realizing it was completely dark outside. His accommodation wasn't far, so he walked back alone. Being busy with patients all day had left him with little time to think about Lynn. Julian and his team stayed in Haven City for a full 100 days. It was only after the local medical system was no longer overwhelmed that he returned to Liucheng with the rest of the Liucheng First Hospital medical team. Before leaving Liucheng, Julian asked the lab for a small piece of the plane's wreckage and took a bottle of seawater from the area where Lynn's helicopter had crashed. Lynn had died in the explosion, leaving no remains. Julian could only collect these things that were connected to her. He buried these items in the backyard. Next to the small pit, he dug another and planted a peach tree. Lynn had loved peach blossoms. Now, to be accompanied by a peach tree after her death, she would surely be happy. Holding the small shovel, Julian looked at the newly planted peach tree and couldn't help but think of the last line from the classical prose, Xiang Jai Xuan Jai. In the courtyard, there is a loquat tree, planted by my wife in the year of her death. Today, its canopy is full and lush. When this peach tree's canopy is full and lush, Lynnie, will you come back? Chapter 20, Back in Liucheng, Julian resumed his 2-point routine between Liucheng First Hospital and home. But the person who used to wait for him to come home was no longer there. The bed they once shared now belonged to him alone. Julian was still the highly skilled ace surgeon of Liucheng First Hospital, but he was now a widower. Although Julian appeared normal every day, was diligent in his work, and even occasionally stayed late to work overtime, Director Finch noticed that something was very wrong with his state of mind. Nearly a year had passed since Lynn's death, but instead of moving on, Julian seemed to be sinking deeper. Apart from communicating with patients' families during work hours, Julian seemed to be perpetually lost in thought. Director Finch felt that Julian had become a different person. One day during the lunch break, the director went to Julian's office and found him staring at his lunch, so lost in thought that he didn't even notice him arrive. The director knocked on the door. Julian finally snapped out of his trance. "Director, you're here." The director frowned and sat down in front of him. "Julian, what were you thinking about just now? You didn't even notice me come in." Julian shook his head. "Nothing." But the director saw right through him. "You were thinking about Lynn, weren't you? You haven't moved on." Caught, Julian fell silent for a long time before saying softly, "Director, I can't move on and I don't want to." The director sighed. He could hear a sense of brokenness in Julian's voice. He was afraid that if this continued, Julian would actually follow Lynn in death. As a doctor himself, the director knew that words were useless in such situations. So he forcefully took Julian to the psychiatry department for a mental and psychological evaluation. The results diagnosed Julian with moderate depression, accompanied by anxiety and obsessive-compulsive symptoms. Looking at the results, the director closed his eyes. He knew it. Julian's behavior had long indicated a psychological illness. Julian, however, showed no reaction to the results. Instead, he asked the psychiatrist, Dr. Simon Carter, a question that stunned the director. "Dr. Carter, psychiatry isn't my specialty. Could you tell me how one develops hallucinatory delusional syndrome?" Dr. Carter was baffled. It was the first time a patient had actively asked to become sick. But given Julian's current condition, he was only a step away from developing such a syndrome. The director was the first to react. Understanding Julian's intention, he pushed him hard and said angrily, "Julian, snap out of it. Hallucinatory delusional syndrome is a clinical manifestation of various mental disorders, primarily characterized by hallucinations, often auditory or visual, which can lead to delusions." The director knew that Julian wanted this illness so he could see Lynn again, to create the illusion that she was still alive. Pushed by the director, Julian stumbled back and hit the desk hard. But he didn't even cry out in pain. He just leaned against the desk, defeated, and murmured, "Director, don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing. I just miss her so much." The director closed his eyes in pain. 8 years ago, when Julian was still a university student interning at Liucheng First Hospital, the director had personally mentored him. Now, 8 years later, his beloved student had become a top surgeon. The first time he met Julian, he knew he would become a great doctor. Julian was brilliant, rational, diligent, and had a high aptitude for learning. He possessed all the qualities of a successful person, so the director had poured all his knowledge into teaching him, and Julian had clearly surpassed his mentor. But the director never imagined that Julian would one day become like this. When did words like depression and anxiety become associated with Julian Croft? A man like Julian, a chosen son of fortune, what could he not have? He seemed immune to failure, but reality had shown that fate is fair to everyone. The director understood that for doctors, it is often hardest to heal themselves. The closer you stand, the narrower your vision becomes. Looking at Julian in this state, the director was angry, but more than that, he was heartbroken. He pointed to the door of the clinic, his voice trembling. "Julian, from now on, I'm giving you an indefinite leave of absence. Take these antidepressants and go. You must take your medication as prescribed and come for regular checkups. You can come back to work when you're well. Otherwise, working in this mental state is not only irresponsible to yourself, but also to your patients." Chapter 21, Julian didn't answer. He took off his white coat, picked up the small bag of medication from Liucheng First Hospital, and silently left. He went straight home. Leaning against the peach tree in the backyard, he drank bottle after bottle of alcohol, trying to numb his nerves. The peach tree he had planted a year ago had grown much taller and was even beginning to bud. But as Julian caressed the new leaves, he felt only a profound sadness. After a week of listless existence at home, Julian packed his bags and headed for Haben City. He wanted to visit the place where Lynn had died one more time. After more than a year, Haben City had completed its post-disaster reconstruction. The city that had been a field of rubble a year ago was now once again filled with tall buildings. Julian went to the sea area where Lynn's helicopter had crashed. The wreckage had long since sunk into the deep sea, leaving no trace of the accident. All he could see was the endless blue expanse. Children were playing on the beach, but Julian couldn't feel any joy. Everything in Haben City had returned to normal, as if the tsunami and the earthquake had never happened. If it weren't for the fact that Lynn had truly left him, Julian would almost believe it was all a hallucination. Julian walked along the beach and came to a village. It seemed to be not far from the mountain where he had landed. Walking into the village, Julian noticed that the houses showed no signs of being rebuilt. The village must have been on high ground and was not affected by the tsunami. If Lynn had abandoned the helicopter with him, the aircraft would have crashed near this village, and this village, which had survived the tsunami and earthquake, would have been wiped out by the fire from the explosion. In that case, Lynn had, without anyone knowing, saved the lives of an entire village. Julian walked around the village and found the scenery beautiful. Most of the villagers made a living by fishing. A salty sea breeze filled the air. But as a doctor, Julian immediately noticed that a village of this size didn't even have a proper clinic. There was only a dilapidated infirmary, and the doctor was just a villager with a little bit of medical knowledge. Julian was shocked. Haven City was not poor, yet the medical conditions in this village were so backward. Almost without thinking, Julian made a decision. He wanted to stay here for a while and provide free medical services to the villagers. He contacted the village chief, wanting to set aside 2 rooms for his clinic. Julian wanted to do something for the villagers Lynn had given her life to protect. The kind and simple village chief was overjoyed to hear that a doctor wanted to provide free medical services. He immediately called a few young men and women from the village to clean out 2 empty rooms for Julian. Julian also had basic medical equipment shipped in, and so he settled down. When the villagers heard that a famous doctor from Liucheng was offering free consultations, they flocked to his clinic. The first few days, Julian was busy from morning to night. Most of the villagers in Haben were elderly or women and children with limited medical knowledge. They came to see Julian for everything from headaches to fevers. Some, having lived in the village their whole lives, had never seen such a sophisticated city person and came just to look. Because of Julian's extraordinary aura, he attracted a lot of curious onlookers. But the villagers were mostly kind and simple, with no ill intentions, so Julian couldn't turn them away. After a week, the novelty wore off, and most of the villagers got to know Julian. They no longer came to his clinic just to stare, and his workload finally eased. Today, there were no patients. The weather was nice, and Julian was planning to close early and watch the sunset by the sea. But an old woman ran over and stopped him from locking the door. Dr. Croft, wait. Chapter 22, Julian paused his action of locking the door and turned to see it was Mrs. Shaw, the most enthusiastic woman in the village. Seeing her hurried steps, Julian knew something was urgent. "What's wrong, Mrs. Shaw?" he asked. Mrs. Shaw stopped abruptly, grabbing Julian's wrist. Her voice was urgent. "Dr. Croft, my daughter just cut her hand while chopping wood. Can you come and take a look?" Hearing this, Julian quickly agreed. He picked up his first aid kit and followed Mrs. Shaw towards her house. Along the way, Mrs. Shaw became breathless and had to rest, so Julian ran ahead to her house on his own. When he reached the house, he saw the door was ajar. He pushed it open and called out tentatively, "Miss Shaw." But when he stepped inside and saw the woman sitting in the courtyard, clutching her injured hand, he froze. Because the woman with her head bowed was, unmistakably, Lynn Hawthorne. Julian stood there, stunned, wondering if he was hallucinating. But the woman he had called Miss Shaw heard the noise and looked up. Julian met her eyes and could clearly see that this woman, who looked exactly like Lynn, looked at him as if he were a complete stranger. Lynn looked up at Julian, her voice cool. "Hello, can I help you?" Although her Mandarin had a slight Haben accent, Julian immediately recognized it as Lynn's voice. Lynn, his Lynnie, was not dead. At that moment, Mrs. Shaw arrived at the gate. Seeing Julian standing there dumbfounded, she urged him, "Dr. Croft, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and bandage my daughter's wound." Julian finally snapped out of his trance and walked quickly to Lynn, his voice trembling as he called out, "Lynnie." Lynn clearly didn't recognize him. She tilted her head and asked, "Doctor, what are you talking about? Who is Vivi?" Seeing Julian's inaction, Mrs. Shaw slapped him on the back. "Dr. Croft, hurry up and treat her." Lynn looked at Mrs. Shaw with a hint of exasperation. "Auntie Martha, I told you it's just a small cut. It's nothing, you didn't have to go get a doctor." Mrs. Shaw retorted, "How is it a small cut? Look at that long gash, so much blood it hurts just looking at it. Dr. Croft, please bandage her up quickly." Only then did Julian notice the blood covering Lynn's hand. Though he had a million questions, he knew this was not the time to ask them. Julian opened his first aid kit, took out iodine and gauze, and sat down next to Lynn. Seeing the blood pouring from Lynn's hand, Julian's heart clenched. He took a piece of gauze and gently wiped the blood from her hand, saying softly, "Lynnie, hold on. This might hurt a little." Lynn grunted in acknowledgement, then suddenly said, "My name is not Lynnie. Doctor, have you mistaken me for someone else?" Chapter 23, Julian was clearly taken aback, but looking at Lynn's clear expression, she truly seemed not to know him. Julian guessed that she must have hit her head during the crash, and the resulting blood clot in her brain was affecting her memory, causing her to forget her past. So, Julian went along with her. "I'm sorry, I got a bit carried away." Julian gently took Lynn's bleeding hand, his eyes full of pain as he wiped away the blood with gauze. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long, stretching from the knuckle of her ring finger up to the back of her hand. Such a wound must have been incredibly painful. Lynn's fingers trembled uncontrollably from the pain, but her expression remained calm, and she didn't cry out once. Julian's movements were extremely gentle, but Mrs. Shaw still stood by, anxiously reminding him, "Dr. Croft, you have to be gentle." Julian didn't respond but looked up at Lynn and said softly, "The disinfectant and medicine might sting a bit. Bear with it. I'll be very careful." Lynn grunted emotionlessly, as if she were not the one who was injured. Julian used forceps to pick up a cotton ball soaked in iodine and gently dabbed it on Lynn's wound. The iodine stung fiercely, causing her hand to tremble several times. She drew in a sharp breath. It really hurt. The pain made her frown. She looked up and met Julian's eyes, which were filled with a heartache and worry she couldn't understand. Lynn didn't understand. Julian was just a doctor. Why was he looking at her with such emotional eyes? Was he like this with every patient? Julian's technique was skilled. After applying the medicine, he wrapped her hand in several layers of gauze and secured it with medical tape. After he was done, Lynn finally said a word of thanks. The man before her was incredibly handsome. His refined aura was completely out of place in this impoverished village. The stool he was sitting on even had rough wooden edges, but his presence made even this humble place seem sophisticated. It must have been a natural, innate nobility. Seeing that Julian had finished bandaging Lynn's wound, Mrs. Shaw smiled. She patted Julian's shoulder familiarly and said, "Thank you, Dr. Croft. Why don't you stay for dinner tonight, Mrs. Shaw was being kind, but she assumed that a city person like Julian wouldn't want to eat their simple, rustic food. To her surprise, Julian agreed as soon as she finished speaking. Mrs. Shaw's eyes crinkled with a smile. "Great, I'll go make dinner now. Aya, you stay here and talk to Dr. Croft, and leave that axe where it is. Be careful with your hand." After Mrs. Shaw's voice faded into the house, only Lynn and Julian were left sitting opposite each other in the quiet courtyard. Julian's gaze never left Lynn's face. She felt a bit uncomfortable under his stare and stood up to leave. Dr. Croft, right? I'll go get you a glass of water." But before she could fully stand up, Julian grabbed her uninjured right hand, stopping her from escaping. Chapter 24, Lynn found this strange doctor very peculiar. Even if he wanted to stop her, a normal person would at most grab her wrist or forearm. Who holds someone's hand like that? If it weren't for Mrs. Shaw's trust in him, she would have thought he was a libertine. The pressure of his hand was not heavy, but his grip was firm. His thumb even gently caressed the back of her hand, sending shivers down her spine. "Don't go, Aya. I don't need water." Lynn sighed in resignation, sat back down, and pulled her hand out of his. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, but she felt like Julian was savoring the feeling of having just held her hand. Lynn was not a talkative person, and sitting opposite a strange man, she didn't know what to say. It was Julian who spoke first. "Your name is Aya, as in, idea?" Lynn nodded without speaking. "Aya, like the yi in Wanny." Hearing this, Lynn could see the man in front of her light up with happiness. "Aya, you're not Mrs. Shaw's daughter, are you? You don't look anything alike." Lynn opened her mouth, unsure how to answer. Just then, Mrs. Shaw came out with a freshly cooked dish and answered for her. "That's right, Dr. Croft. I found Aya by the sea a year ago. I went out early that morning to forage on the beach and saw someone lying motionless on the sand. I don't know what happened to her, but she was passed out on the beach, covered in blood. I thought she was dead. I worked up the courage to check her breathing and found she was still alive. So a few other villagers and I carried her back to my house." She was so badly injured and had a high fever, and we don't have a doctor in our village. I had to go all the way to town to get a doctor to come see her. That doctor was from out of town, I think from Liucheng, here to help with the flood relief. She was a young girl. She bandaged Aya's wounds, left a bunch of medicine, and then rushed back to town to help. That young doctor was amazing. Aya's fever broke that same night, and she woke up the next morning. But Aya hit her head and doesn't remember anything from before. She only remembers her name is Aya. She doesn't know anything else. My husband passed away a long time ago, and I don't have any children, so I let Aya stay with me to keep me company. I don't know how she ended up passed out there alone, but her accent doesn't sound like she's from around here. I guess she was a tourist who got swept into the sea by the tsunami and hit a reef. It's a miracle she wasn't swept away by the waves, or she would have ended up like my late husband. Oh, that earthquake and tsunami were terrifying, but our village is on high ground, so we weren't affected. But those poor disaster victims, it's a good thing so many people came to help, or they would have never gotten through it. Hey, Dr. Croft, you're from Liucheng too, right? I don't think I saw you during the relief efforts. If I had, I would have definitely asked such a handsome young man like you to treat Aya, haha. You people from Liucheng are so kind. First, you come to our aid, helping the refugees, and now you're here in our village giving free consultations. I remember after the earthquake, a great philanthropist donated a lot of money to us. I think he was from Liucheng too. Chapter 25, Mrs. Shaw was a chatterbox. Once she started talking, she went on and on. It was through her words that Julian confirmed that Aya was indeed the missing Lynn Hawthorne. Julian guessed that Lynn must have abandoned the helicopter just before it crashed, which was how she avoided being killed in the explosion. Perhaps she found a piece of floating wood and was eventually pushed to the shore by the rising tide. In any case, Lynn was undoubtedly lucky, and he, who had found his beloved, was also undoubtedly lucky. It seemed his guess was correct. Lynn had indeed lost her memory. Julian also caught the key piece of information in Mrs. Shaw's story. She said she had found a doctor from Liucheng to treat Lynn. The medical team from Liucheng that had come to Haben City's aid were all from Liucheng First Hospital, which meant Julian knew them all. Based on Mrs. Shaw's description, Julian deduced that the doctor who had treated Lynn was Dr. Lucy Albright, the most enthusiastic young female doctor on their relief team. At that time, Julian must have been in the hospital, despondent over the news of Lynn's death, which was why Mrs. Shaw hadn't seen him in the medical team. And Lucy had always admired Julian. If the hospital staff had known about his marriage to Lynn, Lucy would have immediately told him about seeing her. At this thought, Julian closed his eyes in pain. It was all his fault. He should have introduced Lynn to his colleagues at the hospital long ago. Then they wouldn't have missed this past year. Not just at his hospital, but probably few people at her company knew about her relationship with Julian either. There was a time when Julian felt their marriage was one of convenience, with no need to inform his colleagues. Most people at the hospital didn't even know he was married and were constantly trying to set him up with people. Although Julian had refused them all, he had never mentioned that he was married. He never thought he would be the one to shoot himself in the foot. A wave of regret washed over him. Looking at Lynn, sitting peacefully before him, he felt a sense of post-traumatic gratitude. He had to thank all the good deeds he and Lynn had done, which had moved the heavens to return Lynn to him. Even if she had amnesia, it was fine. He would treat it as a fresh start for them. This time, he would not keep his feelings buried, nor would he let Lynn suffer alone. He would love her, cherish her, and make it up to her with all his might. Seeing Julian lost in thought, Mrs. Shaw waved her hand in front of his face. Dr. Croft, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking? Julian came back to his senses. Now knowing that Mrs. Shaw was Lynn's savior, a smile appeared on his face. I'm fine, Auntie Martha. Yes, I'm from Liucheng too. I was here for the medical relief last year, but I was injured and hospitalized at the time, so you didn't see me. Hearing that Julian was hospitalized, Mrs. Shaw instinctively assumed it was serious and asked with concern, "Oh dear, Dr. Croft, weren't you here to treat people? How did you end up in the hospital yourself?" Julian smiled nonchalantly. I'm fine. I just landed on a mountain when I parachuted, rolled down from halfway up, and got a lot of cuts from the thorns. Julian deliberately made his injuries sound more severe, while secretly glancing at Lynn's expression. Lynn showed no emotion, as if the conversation had nothing to do with her. A pang of sadness hit Julian. He forced a smile, not noticing that Lynn's clasped hands had tightened. Chapter 26, hearing how severe Julian's fall was, Mrs. Shaw asked with concern, "You rolled down from halfway up the mountain. Your whole body must have been covered in wounds, oh my goodness, Dr. Croft. It's a good thing you didn't get any scars on your face. It would have been a real shame for such a handsome face." Rural areas were often superstitious, and a scarred face was considered an ill omen, which was why Mrs. Shaw was so concerned about Julian's appearance. Julian smiled. "Auntie Martha, don't worry, I'm fine. And I'm all healed now." After a few more words of concern, Mrs. Shaw went back to the kitchen to continue cooking, leaving Julian and Lynn alone in the courtyard again. Julian watched Lynn and asked, "Aya, you only remember your name as Aya, right? In this past year, have you really not remembered anything else?" Lynn said flatly, "No, I don't remember anything." But Julian wouldn't let it go. From a medical perspective, there are only 4 types of amnesia. First, localized amnesia. Patients with this type have a complete loss of memory for a few hours surrounding the traumatic event. Second, selective amnesia. Patients with this type selectively remember some parts of a certain period and forget others. It happens after an external stimulus or a blow to the head, causing them to forget things they don't want to remember, which could be people or objects. Third, continuous amnesia. Patients with this type forget everything before a certain year or event. And fourth, generalized amnesia. Patients with this type forget their entire life history, including their name, address, and so on. Julian deliberately emphasized the word name, observing Lynn's reaction. "But clearly, Aya, you don't fit into any of these 4 categories. How do you explain that?" Though it was a question, Julian's tone was not inquisitive. His eyes never left Lynn's face, as if he didn't want to miss a single expression. Lynn remained calm, but she was cursing inwardly. "Damn it, how could I forget this guy is a doctor? I walked right into his trap. Now what? Should she continue to fake amnesia, or should she come clean?" It was obvious she couldn't keep up the pretense, but Lynn didn't want to confront Julian either. When the plane crashed, Lynn truly wanted to die. After all, Vivian and Julian had a child. Even if she went back, she would be an outsider and end up divorced. The business alliance between the Hawthorne and Croft families was well known in high society. If Lynn really divorced Julian, the close cooperative relationship between the 2 family businesses would be affected. Although Lynn had brought up divorce several times, she didn't want to make things difficult for her parents, which was why she hadn't prepared a parachute for herself in the first place. Lynn had thought that if the helicopter crashed, she would be considered to have died in the line of duty, preserving the Hawthorne family's reputation and allowing Julian and Vivian to be together. But she never expected that, although her plane did crash, she miraculously survived. Perhaps even fate wanted to give her a chance to start over. Chapter 27, staying in Haben Village with Auntie Martha for the past year had brought Lynn a lot of happiness. To escape reality, she had told Auntie Martha that she had amnesia. When Auntie Martha asked her name, Lynn almost blurted out her nickname, Lynnie. The name immediately brought back memories of Julian holding her and calling her Lynnie in his vulnerable moments. Those were rare moments of affection from him, and only then did Lynn feel that he had feelings for her. But she never imagined that the name he was calling was actually Vivi. She had been a substitute for so long. So Lynn quickly corrected herself and said her name was Aya. She would no longer be someone's substitute. She was the one and only Aya. The villagers of Haben were simple and kind. They all treated her well, as if she were really Auntie Martha's daughter. Lynn felt that her year in Haben was like stolen time. She helped Auntie Martha with chores and sometimes woke up early to go to the beach with her. Haben City was a coastal city with beautiful scenery, and its economy relied on tourism. Auntie Martha had a stall in the city's largest seafood market and would often go to the beach to collect things to sell. It was more than enough to support herself. Lynn would sometimes ride on the back of Auntie Martha's motorcycle to the market with her. When it got busy, she could help out. Perhaps because Lynn was beautiful, Auntie Martha's business was always better when Lynn was with her. So, over time, Auntie Martha started taking Lynn with her every day, like a real mother and daughter. Seeing Lynn lost in thought, Julian guessed that her amnesia was most likely an act. He leaned in, took her uninjured hand, and whispered, "Lynnie, don't lie to me anymore, okay?" Hearing Julian's nickname, Lynn's temper flared. She yanked her hand away from his and snapped, "Don't call me Lynnie." Julian was taken aback by her sudden outburst, but he quickly guessed that she was upset about Vivian. After all, Vivian had told her so many lies to try to get them together, so Julian placated her. "Don't be angry, I won't call you that. I'll call you Aya, okay?" But Lynn was not appeased. She said coldly, "No need. Aya is too intimate. Dr. Croft, you should just call me Miss Hawthorne." Her words were a tacit admission of her identity. Julian was thrilled. Lynn really didn't have amnesia. Although he had spoken with such certainty just now, he knew that apart from the 4 types of amnesia, there could be other exceptions. Julian had just been trying to bluff her, and he had succeeded. He couldn't help but lean closer, his face beaming. "Lynn, you really don't have amnesia? It's so good to see you're okay. You have no idea what I've been through this past year." But Lynn's face was a mask of cold indifference. "Julian, don't forget, you were the one who wronged me first. We're already divorced." Chapter 28, seeing Lynn's icy demeanor, Julian explained, "Lynn, you've misunderstood me. There's really nothing between me and Vivian." Lynn clearly didn't believe him. "You're still lying to me. Vivian said you two even have a child. Didn't she resign because you wanted her to rest and take care of her pregnancy?" Julian looked exasperated and rubbed his forehead. What on earth had Vivian been saying? He grabbed Lynn's hand again, this time with a bit more force, and she couldn't pull away. "Lynn, Vivian was deliberately trying to provoke you. She knew I've been in love with you for years and saw that our relationship wasn't going well, so she tried to use reverse psychology on you. Everything she said was made up. She wanted you to confront me so I could finally confess my feelings to you. Who knew you would believe all her nonsense and insist on a divorce? Lynn, when I rushed to Haven City, I was planning to bring you home and then tell you everything. I never expected things to take such a sudden turn." Lynn was confused. She understood every word Julian was saying, but when they were put together, she couldn't quite grasp the meaning. What did he mean? He had been in love with her for years. It was she who had a secret crush on him. For years, Lynn's eyes widened in disbelief. "Julian, don't treat me like a 3-year-old. I'm not that naive. Are you telling me you had nothing to do with Vivian being parachuted in as the new captain of GX 716? And that time, on a rainy weekend, I wanted you to pick me up, but when I called you, I heard your friends talking about how you and Vivian were a perfect match. And that night, it was Vivian who brought you home drunk. She said you married me because I look like her." Julian's expression was complicated. After a long pause, he finally explained, "Lynn, I've been in love with you for many years. I remember one day after school, I came home and saw you visiting with your parents. When I burst in, everyone turned to look at me, but even with so many people on the sofa, I only saw you. I remember you were wearing the same white school uniform shirt as me, with a cute bob haircut. You just looked at me with curiosity. I knew then that I was done for. I think I fell in love with you at first sight." Lynn was surprised, but Julian's confession continued. "From then on, every time you came to my house, I would wait at home in advance, even changing into what I thought was my most handsome outfit to get your attention. When my parents visited your house, I would always tag along, saying I was bored, but I just wanted to see you. I found that my heart would beat so fast whenever I saw you. I knew I had fallen in love, but every time I looked at you, your expression was so cold, so I naturally assumed you didn't like me. I was young and proud back then. I don't know why, but instead of pursuing the girl I liked, I got into a competition with you. I saw that you didn't like me and was afraid of being rejected, so I kept avoiding it, too proud to take the first step. I thought, since you're so cold to me, I'll be even colder to you." Chapter 29, during the 2 years I was studying abroad, I met a woman who confessed her feelings for me. I noticed she looked a bit like you and even had the same profession, but her style and personality were completely different. I rejected her very clearly and told her that the girl I liked had a similar profession and appearance. She joked that she could be your substitute. I didn't agree, but we ended up becoming friends. That woman was Vivian. Later, when I came back, my parents told me they wanted me to marry you and asked for my opinion. I had been in love with you for so many years, how could I not agree? I was overjoyed. But when I asked my parents about your feelings, they said you would listen to your parents and let them decide. I was so angry. I thought, if it wasn't me you were marrying, would you still have gone through with it? So after we got married, I was still stubborn and competitive with you. Lynn, you don't know, but on our wedding day, my hands were shaking with excitement. When Vivian came back this time, she was determined to play matchmaker for us. Because I also wanted to know your feelings for me, I helped her get into your airline. I never thought she would tell you so many lies about a child, an old flame, a first love. It was all fake. There was nothing between us. We were just ordinary friends. And every time I held you and called you Lynnie, it was always you. I thought you would soften if I was sick, so I dared to be so forward. I never knew you thought I was calling someone else. Lynn, the person I love has always been you, and only you. I've never liked anyone else. Lynn could almost hear a hint of grievance in Julian's voice. Her hand was held by his, and her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. His long explanation was a lot to take in. So, he was saying that they had both been in love with each other for years, but each thought they were the ones suffering from unrequited love. But then Lynn thought about it. Julian had been proud for so many years, but she had also been the one to hide her feelings. Perhaps it was a professional habit, but Lynn was used to burying her emotions and dealing with them silently. Plus, her personality was naturally a bit cool, so it made sense that Julian couldn't see her love. She had been so surprised back then that Julian would agree to an arranged marriage, because Julian didn't seem like the type to obey his parents. But if he had been in love with her all along, then it all made sense. Lynn suddenly remembered, a year ago on the plane, when Julian had solemnly said he would die with her. She had been shocked at the time. He clearly didn't love her, so why would he die with her? Now she knew. It was a heartfelt vow to her. Because he loved her, he wouldn't leave her alone. He would die with her. Chapter 30, after understanding the whole story, Lynn's emotions were a complicated mix. She and Julian were like the pot calling the kettle black. When it came to the misunderstandings and missed opportunities of the past years, neither had the right to blame the other. Although she now knew that Julian had always loved her, the tears she had shed and the pain she had felt over the years were not fake. Lynn couldn't bring herself to reconcile with Julian so quickly, so, in response to his long confession, she just gave a faint "oh." Seeing her reaction, Julian became anxious. "What does "oh" mean? Lynn, don't you believe me? I know I was too childish and went too far in the past, and I hurt you. Can you give me one last chance? I promise I won't let you down." Lynn was also feeling awkward now. "I didn't say I don't believe you." Seeing that Lynn believed him, Julian was overjoyed. "Lynn, since you're so honest, shouldn't you tell me your feelings too? Say what? Just say, how you've liked me all these years." Julian raised an eyebrow, a smug look on his face that made Lynn want to punch him. Was this the same cool and distant Julian? Lynn said irritably, "In your dreams, I can't say those cheesy things." Julian stared at her, his expression serious. "Lynn, since you believe me, shouldn't we get back together? I never agreed to the divorce. You're still my wife, Julian Croft's wife. You still have to come home with me." Lynn's eyes darted around, a hint of coyness in her voice. "Well, that depends on your performance." Julian was about to say more when Auntie Martha came out of the kitchen with a spatula. "Dr. Croft, Aya, it's time to eat, Aya. Remember to set the table." With that, she went back into the kitchen to finish up. Lynn glanced at Julian, pointed to where the table was kept, and ordered, "You go." Julian chuckled. "Giving me orders already?" Lynn looked at him as if it were the most natural thing in the world, holding up her injured left hand and wiggling it. "I'm injured. I can't carry the table." Julian looked at Lynn with a smile, but he didn't move to get up. Lynn sighed and stood up, feigning drama. "Well, I don't know who was just telling me they would do everything they could to be good to me, but now they won't even help me move a table. I guess it's true, you can't believe a word a man says." With that, she started walking toward the table herself. Julian smiled indulgently. He stepped forward and gently pushed Lynn back onto her stool. "All right, how could I possibly trouble my dear wife with such a small task? It's my responsibility, of course." With that, Julian went to get the folding table from the corner, set it up in the middle of the courtyard, and then brought out 3 stools. After that, he went to the kitchen on his own, got 3 sets of bowls and chopsticks, and then ran back and forth, bringing out the dishes Auntie Martha had cooked. Lynn opened her mouth, watching Julian run back and forth, a bit taken aback. Julian's nickname for her had made her heart race and her face flush. Now, seeing him look at her with a smile, Lynn quickly turned her head away, but a small smile played on her lips. Chapter 31. Auntie Martha came out with the last dish and saw Julian bustling about. She was a bit flattered. "Oh my, Dr. Croft, you're a guest. Why are you so busy? Don't worry about it, sit down and eat." "Aya, how could you let a guest do all the work?" Before Lynn could speak, Julian answered, "It's all right, Auntie Martha. Aya's hand is injured, so I told her not to do any work. These are small things, I can handle them." For the first time, Lynn felt the pleasure of being defended by Julian, and she squinted her eyes in contentment. She sat down at the table and said to Auntie Martha, "Auntie Martha, why are you taking his side? Dr. Croft is young and strong, he should do more work." "Right, Dr. Croft." Julian, now sitting on the other side of the table, saw Lynn's smiling face and suddenly felt that this aloof little cat was now showing her claws. This vibrant version of her was so much better than the one who used to cry alone. At least now, Julian could see that Lynn cared about him too. Julian smiled and picked up where Lynn left off. "Yes, Aya is right. As a man, it's my duty to do more work." Auntie Martha was delighted. She looked at Julian with approval and said, "Dr. Croft is handsome, a great doctor, and has such a good personality. Come on, eat up." With that, she piled several chopsticks worth of food into Julian's bowl. Auntie Martha was an excellent cook. The 2 meat and 2 vegetable dishes on the table were all delicious. Julian hadn't expected much from Auntie Martha's cooking, but it was surprisingly good. He had been invited to the village chief's house for dinner every day recently. Well, the village chief's cooking was not something he could enjoy, so he had started making excuses to cook for himself. But Dr. Croft, who could handle all kinds of surgical instruments with ease, had no talent for cooking. He couldn't even make a simple egg-fried rice. In the past, at home, it was either the housekeeper or Lynn who cooked, or he ate at the hospital. In short, Julian was not familiar with kitchen utensils. Haben Village had no food delivery, and it was unrealistic for Julian to drive to the city for every meal. So these days, Julian had been struggling to learn to cook from online recipes. Although Julian was a terrible cook, his professional habits made his knife skills excellent. His sliced and diced vegetables looked like works of art, but once these works of art went into the pan, it was a disaster. So when Auntie Martha invited him to stay for dinner, he was more than happy to accept. Seeing that Julian enjoyed her cooking, Auntie Martha was also very happy. "It's great that you like my cooking, Dr. Croft. Come over often." Julian, who had been busy eating, looked up and asked, "Can I really come over often? I can pay." Auntie Martha was stunned. Lynn, at the side, couldn't help but laugh. She knew how bad Julian's cooking was. He must not have had a proper meal in days. Seeing Auntie Martha's confusion, Julian explained, "Auntie Martha, I'm a terrible cook. I've been struggling to cook for myself these past few days. This meal is the best I've had since I came to Haben Village." Understanding the situation, Auntie Martha laughed heartily. She hadn't expected Julian to admit his cooking was bad. "It's all right, Julian. Everyone has things they're not good at. From now on, you can eat at my house. You provide free medical services to our village every day. It's only right that I treat you to a meal on behalf of the village." Chapter 32. After dinner, Julian insisted on washing the dishes, but Auntie Martha shooed him away. "Oh, Dr. Croft, I'm used to doing these things. You don't have to fight me for it. While it's still light out, why don't you let Aya show you around?" Lynn had only intended to walk Julian to the gate, but when they got there, he showed no signs of leaving alone. After walking a few steps, Julian noticed Lynn hadn't followed. He turned back to look at her and asked, "What's wrong? Not coming? Auntie Martha said you should show me around. Why aren't you listening?" Lynn pouted but followed him anyway. They walked along the narrow path, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. After a short while, Julian naturally took Lynn's hand, and this time she didn't resist. "Lynn, how did you survive a year ago? Do you know I was frantically looking for you? When I got the news that you had died, I almost followed you. I really didn't want to live at first, but then I regretted it. So I broke the cockpit window and jumped into the sea just before the plane crashed. I swam with all my might toward the shore to escape the explosion. I managed to avoid it, but I passed out from exhaustion before I reached the shore. I thought I was going to drown, but I was washed up on the beach. I guess I was just lucky. Hearing Lynn so calmly describe her near-death experience, Julian's heart ached. He squeezed her hand and asked, "Lynn, since you were alive, why didn't you go back to Liucheng to find us? If you really didn't want to see me, you could have gone back to your own home. You have no idea how heartbroken your parents were when they heard you had died." Lynn was silent for a long time before saying, "Because I thought you and Vivian had a child. My parents would never have let me suffer that kind of humiliation, so even if I went back, I would have had to divorce you. But our marriage was a business alliance, and I didn't want to make things difficult for my parents. So the problem was still with him." Julian felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Lynn. It was all my fault. I promise from now on, I won't let you suffer even a little bit." Lynn glanced at him and asked, "Are you and Vivian really over?" Julian raised 3 fingers in a vow. "There was never anything between us. 3 months after you left, she was headhunted by another airline. So she's already left Liucheng, and we were only ever ordinary friends." Lynn nodded. "All right then. If I ever find out you're lying to me, I'll never speak to you again." "I won't, Lynn. I was too immature before, so I chose to hide all my emotions and brood by myself. In this marriage and this relationship, we lacked so much communication. Lynn, I've thought a lot during the years you were gone, and I've reflected a lot. So please believe me, I won't make the same mistakes again. From now on, I will be completely open with you. Lynn, I know you can't accept all of this at once. It's okay, I'll give you time. When you've thought it through, you can give me your answer." Chapter 33. Knowing that Lynn was alive filled Julian with immense joy. Even his steps back to his residence felt lighter than usual. After a whole year of gloom, the clouds in his mind finally began to part. Julian rummaged through his belongings and found the antidepressants he had gotten from the hospital. He hadn't taken a single one since he brought them back. He had only brought them to Haben Village on a whim, but now he was grateful for that whim. Although knowing Lynn was alive had lifted his spirits considerably, it didn't mean his depression would magically disappear. So, Julian still had to cooperate with the medication. Julian felt he had never been so eager to get better. The thought of seeing Lynn again tomorrow seemed to cure the insomnia that had plagued him for so long. For once, he didn't toss and turn, staring at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, Julian opened his clinic early, ready for a new day of work. There weren't many patients in the morning, a stark contrast to his days at Liucheng First Hospital. Back then, as the hospital's top surgeon, countless patients sought him out every day. His surgical schedule was almost always full. With his skilled hands and exquisite technique, he had saved many lives from the brink of death. That was what Lynn had said. He was a doctor, and he had more meaningful things to do than die with her. Now, after only a little over half a month of rest, he was being bombarded with calls and texts from the director. "Julian, how have you been lately? Are you feeling any better? Julian, have you been taking your medication on time? How are you feeling? Julian, remember to come back to the hospital for your monthly checkup. I'm not rushing you to come back to work, but without you, many patients and doctors ask about you every day, and many patients are waiting for you. But you don't have to force yourself for others. Take your time. Your health comes first. That's being responsible to yourself and to others." As Julian's superior, teacher, and elder, the director sent him a greeting message almost every day, but Julian rarely replied. At 11 in the morning, Julian received another message from the director. "Julian, I went to your house today. I knocked for a long time, but no one answered. Are you out of town? Is everything all right? Please reply when you see this so we know you're safe. Everyone is worried about you." This time, Julian replied immediately, "Director, I'm fine, don't worry. I'm in Haben City doing volunteer medical work. I'm not at home. I'm doing much better lately. Please give me a little more time. I should be able to come back to work soon." After replying, Julian gathered all the food he had bought, locked the clinic, and headed to Auntie Martha's house. Julian had bought a lot of groceries, but he had barely cooked any of them. He figured he might as well bring them to Auntie Martha's, where they would be put to good use. He had discovered that he and the art of cooking were not meant to be. As the saying goes, nothing is impossible if you're willing to give up. Auntie Martha's house was only 2 streets away from where Julian was staying. With his long legs and eagerness to see Lynn, he arrived at her doorstep in no time. Julian knocked on the door, and soon, Lynn's voice came from inside. Coming, Chapter 34. Lynn came bouncing to the door. Seeing it was Julian, she was a bit surprised. "Julian, why are you here so early?" Julian stepped over the threshold and into the courtyard, smiling. "What's wrong? Don't want to see me? There weren't many patients this morning, so I thought I'd come over a little early to help out. I can't just be a freeloader." Lynn was surprised. "Julian, how come your attitude has improved so much in a year? You weren't like this at home. You were the king of delegation." Julian put the groceries in the kitchen and rolled up his sleeves. "Well, I realized my mistakes, so I'm trying to change. How is it? Is my dear wife satisfied?" Lynn scoffed. "Julian, don't call me that. Give you an inch and you take a mile. I'm starting to miss the old, stern you. You're like a completely different person now." Julian smiled without answering, focusing on washing his hands. Lynn felt that all doctors had a thing about hand washing, especially surgeons like Julian who had to scrub in for surgery. Every time he washed his hands, he strictly followed the 7-step procedure, meticulously. Julian's hands were long and slender, with a beautiful bone structure. They were the kind of hands a medical student would want to make a model of. Lynn used to love watching him wash his hands, and now was no exception. She stared at his hands until he finished and looked up, only then realizing she had been lost in thought. Julian chuckled, pulled Lynn to a chair at the table, and then took out the first aid kit he had left behind yesterday. Lynn's wound needed to be redressed daily, so Julian had left the kit there. He unwrapped the gauze from Lynn's hand. The wound was already starting to heal. He held her hand in one of his, used forceps to pick up a cotton ball, and gestured for her to push the iodine bottle closer. Lynn watched him and obediently did as he asked. The wound hadn't fully healed, so the iodine still stung sharply. Now that her emotional turmoil had subsided, Lynn no longer pretended to be fine. She grabbed the corner of Julian's shirt and whimpered in pain. Seeing this, Julian was both amused and pained. "You were acting so tough yesterday. What's wrong today? Not pretending anymore?" Lynn sucked in a few sharp breaths and urged him to hurry up. Tears were welling up in her eyes. She glared at him with her tear-filled eyes. "I was pretending not to know you yesterday. Of course it hurts. I was about to bite my teeth off. Julian, can you hurry up? It hurts so much." While Lynn was complaining, Julian quickly redressed her wound and wrapped it with fresh gauze. "If you know it hurts, then be more careful. It's a good thing the cut isn't deep. If you had swung that axe any harder, you could have lost half your hand. Why were you chopping wood anyway? It's so dangerous." "It was an accident. I've chopped wood many times before without any problems. It was just this one time I was careless. If I hadn't cut my hand, you wouldn't have found me." Julian's expression turned serious. "Lynn, if the price of finding you again is you getting hurt, then I would rather not." "Lynn, I need you to take care of yourself. Please don't put yourself in danger again, okay? Even if it's for me, please." "Lynn, do you know? This past year, I've had countless dreams of you pushing me from the plane, of the explosion, of hearing the news of your death. Do you know how much my heart ached? Every time I had those dreams, I would wake up with a start." "Lynn, having a nightmare isn't the scary part. The truly scary part is waking up and realizing that the nightmare was real." Chapter 35. Seeing Julian suddenly become so serious, Lynn felt a bit unaccustomed. "All right, I get it. I'll be careful from now on. I promise, something like this won't happen again." Julian's expression didn't soften, so Lynn changed the subject. "Julian, I knew it was you when you first came to Haven Village to do volunteer medical work. And the kind person who donated $5 million to Haven City, that was you too, right?" Julian sighed. "Yes, it was me. I thought that was all I could do for the disaster area. Since you knew it was me, why did you avoid me? Were you still angry with me?" Lynn shook her head. "I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't see you because I didn't dare to. I knew I wasn't over you yet. I was afraid that if I saw you, all my efforts to forget you over the past year would be in vain. Because I didn't know you liked me too." Julian pulled Lynn into his arms and said, "Lynn, let's not dwell on the past. Promise me from now on we'll live a good life together, okay?" Before Lynn could answer, there was a noise at the gate. It was Auntie Martha, back from her errands. Lynn's face flushed, and she quickly pushed Julian away. She broke free from his embrace and went to greet Auntie Martha at the gate. Julian was momentarily stunned by her quick movement, his arms now empty. But then he saw her red ears and couldn't help but smile. Lynn went to the gate and opened it for Auntie Martha. "Auntie Martha, you're back. How was business today? I didn't go with you today. Were you able to manage?" Auntie Martha's face lit up when she saw Lynn. "Aya, you didn't come with me today, and so many people were asking about you. I told them you hurt your hand and were resting at home. Many people were very concerned and told you to rest well." Lynn smiled and took Auntie Martha's arm. "Okay, when I'm better, I'll definitely go and thank everyone for their concern." The people of Haben were mostly simple and kind. In her time selling seafood with Auntie Martha, Lynn had received immense kindness. Born with a silver spoon in her mouth, this was Lynn's first time experiencing the life of ordinary people, a world she had never known. As a pilot, Lynn was very adaptable to new environments. So when she first came to Haben Village, she didn't feel out of place despite the change in lifestyle. In fact, she enjoyed the novelty of it. Liucheng was an inland city, so seafood was not common. The first time Lynn went to the seafood market with Auntie Martha, she was amazed by the variety of seafood. Over time, Lynn came to enjoy this life. Auntie Martha walked into the courtyard and saw Julian standing in the middle. She was surprised. "Hey, Dr. Croft, you're here so early." "Not busy today?" Julian smiled. "Not many patients today, so I thought I'd come early to help Aya with her wound and lend a hand. I can't just be a freeloader. I brought some groceries too." Hearing Julian's words, Auntie Martha was overjoyed. She patted Lynn's hand and said with a laugh, "Aya, did you hear that? Dr. Croft is such a nice young man." "Aya, listen to Auntie Martha. You should find a husband like Dr. Croft. Responsible, willing to help, and handsome too, don't you think? By the way, Dr. Croft, I haven't asked if you have a girlfriend yet. If not, I can introduce you to some. I'm not bragging, but I know all the single girls in the village. I can definitely introduce you to some excellent ones." Julian smiled without answering, instead looking at Lynn. Chapter 36. Lynn's face grew warm under his gaze. She turned away, avoiding his eyes. Auntie Martha found Julian's silence strange. "Dr. Croft, why aren't you answering? Do you already have someone you like?" Auntie Martha looked at Julian quizzically and saw him smiling at Lynn without saying a word. Auntie Martha was no fool. As the head of the Haben Village Intelligence Department and the biggest matchmaker, she could tell from a single glance that something was going on between Julian and Lynn. She sized up Julian, then Lynn, and said with a laugh, "Dr. Croft, I thought you were just here for a free meal. I didn't realize you had other intentions. Could it be that you've taken a liking to our Aya?" "Dr. Croft, to be honest with you, in the year Aya has been with me, it's not like no one has come to ask for her hand in marriage. On the contrary, many have seen how beautiful she is, and knowing she has amnesia, have tried to take advantage and marry her. But I've sent them all away. To be honest, Aya has brought me so much joy this past year. In my heart, she's like my own daughter. My husband passed away a long time ago, and I've been alone for most of my life, living in this house all by myself. It was quite lonely. It was Aya's arrival that brought life to this little place. It felt like I finally had a reason to rush home every day because I knew someone was waiting for me." As she spoke, Auntie Martha began to wipe away tears. Lynn started crying too. She hugged Auntie Martha and choked out, "Auntie Martha." Auntie Martha lovingly stroked Lynn's head and said, "Dr. Croft, I've lived in the countryside for so many years, so I know what those people are thinking. But I can tell you're different from those who are only after Aya's beauty. You are an upright and trustworthy person. Auntie Martha hasn't known you for long, but I've seen how dedicated you've been in helping the villagers with their illnesses. I know you sometimes even go to the homes of the elderly who have difficulty moving around to provide house calls. I'm a country woman with little experience, but I can tell you're a wealthy man. They say men with money tend to go bad, but after meeting you, I don't think so. Dr. Croft, if you are sincere about our Aya, and if our Aya likes you too, then I am willing to entrust her to you." Seeing how genuine Auntie Martha's feelings for Lynn were, Julian was also moved. He took a few steps forward and said honestly, "Auntie Martha, I actually came to Haben Village to find Aya. Aya is my wife who has been missing for a year. A year ago, she fell into the sea during a mission. I searched for her for a long, long time but couldn't find any news. I thought she had died. The reason I came to Haben Village to do volunteer medical work was because it's close to the sea where Aya went missing, so I wanted to take a look around. It was a coincidence that I saw the poor medical conditions in Haben Village, which gave me the idea to do volunteer work. I also wanted to do what I could for the villagers. I never expected to be reunited with Aya. Auntie Martha's mouth fell open. She looked at Julian in surprise, then at Lynn and asked, "Aya, is what Dr. Croft said true?" Lynn wiped away her tears and smiled. "Auntie Martha, my illness is cured. I remember everything from the past, so I can prove that what he said is true." Chapter 37. Hearing Lynn's words, Auntie Martha became excited. She held Lynn's hand and repeatedly asked, "Really? Aya, you remember. You and Dr. Croft are married?" Lynn felt a bit shy. "Auntie Martha, actually, I never had amnesia. Something happened a year ago and I didn't want to face it, so I pretended to have amnesia to escape." "Auntie Martha, you're not angry that I lied to you for so long, are you?" Auntie Martha was very emotional. "What are you talking about, child? How could I be angry with you? I'm so happy to see you're well. How could I be angry?" Lynn said from the bottom of her heart, "Auntie Martha, thank you so much for taking care of me this past year. You've treated me like your own daughter. You saved my life and gave me food and shelter. I don't know how I can ever thank you." Auntie Martha wiped the tears from Lynn's eyes with her slightly rough hand and said, "Aya, silly child, I don't need any thanks. As long as you're happy, I'm happy." With that, Auntie Martha took Lynn's hand and placed it in Julian's. She patted their hands and said, "Auntie Martha doesn't know what happened between you two in the past, but I can see your feelings for each other are real, so I'm very happy for you. No matter what you choose, I'll support you. Now to celebrate you finding each other, I'm going to cook a big meal for lunch today." Julian followed her. "Auntie Martha, I'll help you." Auntie Martha had originally treated Julian as a guest and would never have let him do any work. But now that Julian had revealed his relationship with Lynn, in Auntie Martha's eyes, he was her son-in-law, one of her own, so it was only natural for him to help out. So Auntie Martha naturally started giving him orders. "Dr. Croft, can you chop these 2 vegetables? Dr. Croft, can you wash these bowls? Dr. Croft, come here and learn from me. Being my son-in-law is a tough job." Lynn watched Julian being ordered around in the kitchen by Auntie Martha and couldn't help but laugh. In Liucheng, no one would dare to order Julian Croft, the great young master, around like this. Julian had been raised to be a gentleman who never had to lift a finger. Being ordered around by Auntie Martha must have been hard for him. But when Lynn looked at Julian, she saw no sign of impatience on his face. He obediently did as he was told. Perhaps it was because Julian also saw Auntie Martha as Lynn's savior and was seriously trying to repay her. But both Julian and Lynn felt an unprecedented warmth from Auntie Martha. Chapter 38. With Julian's help, lunch was quickly prepared. The 3 of them sat around the small table from the night before, and Auntie Martha even brought out a bottle of her homemade wine. "Come on, Dr. Croft, let's have a drink to celebrate today." With that, Auntie Martha brought out 3 wine glasses, but Julian stopped her as she was about to pour. "Auntie Martha, Aya is injured and can't drink. I'm also in a treatment period, so I can't drink much either. Just a little bit to toast. When I'm better, I'll come and have a proper drink with you." This lunch lasted much longer than usual because Auntie Martha kept questioning Julian at the table. Auntie Martha truly treated Lynn as her own daughter, so she asked Julian about every detail of his life, as if she were afraid he would mistreat Lynn. After hearing the story of Julian and Lynn's past years, Auntie Martha couldn't help but frown. "What kind of mess is this? Just because you two kept everything to yourselves, you missed out on all these years. You two are really something. A person has a mouth to talk, right? But you two just let each other guess. What can I say? Julian, it's not my place to say, but as a man, you should have been more proactive, but you had to be stubborn with our Aya. So childish. Aya, you too. What's the point of crying alone at night? You should have cried in front of him, then he would have known he was wrong. You don't understand, tears are a woman's best weapon against the man she loves." Auntie Martha patted Julian and Lynn's shoulders, gesturing for them to learn. "You two are still too naive. You should learn from me. Love is just that simple, isn't it?" Hearing Auntie Martha's words, Julian and Lynn couldn't help but laugh. Yes, it was such a simple problem. How could they not have understood it before? But thankfully, they had done many good deeds in the past, which had earned them this chance to start over. After lunch, Lynn took Julian's arm and they slowly walked toward his residence. With their hearts unburdened, Lynn felt an unprecedented sense of relaxation. She took a deep breath of the fresh air and said, "Julian, I think Auntie Martha is right. We were a bit too dramatic in the past." Julian also smiled. "Yes, but at least we didn't miss each other." "Julian, after I came to Haben Village, I never thought that one day I would be walking hand in hand with you on this road. Do you know, when I was here, I often thought of you in my free time. I would wonder what you were doing. Were you and Vivian planning your future as a family of 3? The thought of it made my heart ache, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. But when I saw you again and heard your long overdue confession, I knew that while I was thinking of you, you were also thinking of me. Julian, I'm so happy to know this. All my years of love were not one-sided." Chapter 39, Julian felt a wave of emotion, but in the end, he said nothing, simply planting a cherished kiss on Lynn's forehead. "No, Aya. A person as good as you, no one would bear to let your love be one-sided." Hearing Julian's words, Lynn squinted her eyes in contentment. She actively hugged his waist and sighed, "Jules, I should be the one to thank you for waiting for me for so many years." They embraced on the deserted country road for a long time, as if no force in the world could ever separate them again. The afternoon sun stretched their shadows long, so long that it seemed to reach the end of time, decades from now. Lynn suddenly seemed to remember something. She looked up from Julian's embrace, her voice tense. "Julian, you told Auntie Martha you couldn't drink because you were in a treatment period. What's wrong? Are you sick?" Lynn was nervous. She began to pat him all over, checking if he was sick anywhere. She found it strange. He didn't seem to be missing any limbs. What could be wrong? Could he have made it up to avoid drinking? Julian smiled and grabbed her restless hands. "Aya, stop looking. It's not a physical injury." Lynn's heart tightened. "What? Not a physical injury? Is it an internal one? What's wrong? Do you have cancer? Is it early or late stage? Can it be cured?" Seeing her worried face and the barrage of questions, Julian couldn't help but laugh. Seeing him laugh, Lynn got angry. She hit him and snapped, "Julian, stop laughing, what's wrong with you?" Julian gently booped her nose and said, "It's not cancer and it's not a serious illness. It's depression." Lynn was stunned. She had been preparing for the worst, but she never expected him to have depression. She had been on the verge of tears just now. She sniffled and asked, "How did you get depression? Is it serious? When did it happen? Did you leave Luocheng First Hospital because of your illness?" Julian smiled. "Aya, you have so many questions. Which one should I answer first?" Chapter 40. Seeing Julian's flippant tone, as if he didn't take his depression seriously, Lynn got angry and turned to leave. Julian saw she was angry and quickly caught up with her, pinning her against a wall and coaxing her softly. "Don't be angry, Aya. I'll answer them one by one. I got depression because your death was a huge blow to me. It's not serious. The director forced me to go to the psychiatry department and get medication, so I'm much better now. I came to Haben Village because the director was afraid my condition would affect my work, so he gave me a long leave." As Lynn had thought, Julian's depression was related to her. Seeing the self-blame on Lynn's face, Julian's heart ached. "Aya, you don't have to blame yourself, I'm fine." Although Julian said so, Lynn knew that a psychological illness like depression was no small matter. It was only a step away from suicide. Lynn had been thinking of staying in Haben Village for a while longer before going back with Julian. But now, Julian's condition made it impossible to delay. So Lynn explained the situation to Auntie Martha, saying she needed to take Julian back for treatment. Auntie Martha was very understanding and told them to go get him treated and live a happy life together. 3 days later, Lynn and Julian said goodbye to the villagers of Haben and set off on their journey back to Luocheng. Ever since she learned of Julian's illness, Lynn's care for him had been meticulous. She wouldn't even let him drive on the highway back to Luocheng. Julian was amused. Although he thought Lynn was making a fuss, he secretly enjoyed being so cherished by her. As soon as they got back to Luocheng, before Lynn could even visit her parents, she dragged Julian to Luocheng Hospital for a checkup. On the way to the clinic, they ran into the director. The director was shocked to see Lynn standing before him, alive and well. But Lynn just gave him a quick greeting. She was in a hurry to get Julian to his checkup and had no time for pleasantries. Julian wanted to chat with the director for a bit, but Lynn dragged him away. The results of the checkup came back, mild depression. Julian looked at the results and smiled at Lynn. "See, I told you I'm much better. It's gone from moderate to mild. Lynn slapped him playfully and said with a mock threat, "Julian, stop being so glib. From now on, I'll be watching you every day to make sure you take your medication. You need to get better quickly." Julian hugged Lynn and smiled. "Aya, it's a deal then. You have to watch over me for the rest of my life." The end.